All right, Mayor, we are live.
Good evening. Welcome to the May 12th, 2020 session of the East Lansing City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Present.
Councilmember Gregg,
Here.
Councilmember Meadows,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Here.
and Mayor Byer.
Here. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I move that today's agenda be approved. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Moved by Mayor, approved by the Mayor Pro Tem. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving today's agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The agenda for today is approved. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 30th, 2020 meeting. I will move approval of those minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Gregg. Is there any discussion? Corrections? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. The next item is 1.4. I move approval of the adoption of a special rule pursuant to MCL 15.2631 to limit public comment during the communications section and the public hearing section for this virtual meeting and all other virtual meetings to 5 minutes per individual. Can I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Meadows. Is there any discussion on this item?
Sorry,
Councilmember Stevens?
thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, would this apply to any virtual meetings needed to be held, let's say, post-pandemic?
The way I moved it, yes.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Just in response, I don't know what post-pandemic means because I don't think there is post-pandemic.
I was
I know what
more
you're-
referring to this as a medium for future meetings in a case of a necessary later down the line if this would still apply, or
We
if
can
this is
always-
just for the situation.
Yeah, whoever's council can change that then.
Okay.
If there's no other discussion, all those in favor of approving this special rule signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, this has been approved. Before I get to the next section, I want to let everybody know that we will be taking a 10-minute break after item 5.2 and before item 5.3, because 5.3 is long. All right. The next item on the agenda is communications. All written communications that we have received, the council has received, has been posted, and they are on the agenda here, and they're also posted on the website. If anybody has a communication that was not posted, please send it to me and I will make sure it gets up there. The next item is communications from the audience. For this part, the clerk will call everybody who is in the audience. If you wish to speak, please go ahead. If you don't want to speak, you can just say pass or I don't want to speak. So, Ms. Schuster, are you doing this or is Nicole doing this? Sorry.
We'll be doing this.
Ms. Bartel.
Yes. Thank you. The first caller is a caller with the phone number ending in 336. Caller 336, would you like to address council?
Yes, hi, my name is Talise Murray. I am the chair of the Human Relations Commission.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, so I am calling to make a comment on the, under the police Community Relations Review Committee on the 5th member that is assigned as the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. Now, in the last year and a half, the HRC has held a series of public meetings and conversation with community members around the makeup of this body. And we've heard unanimously, both in our in public comments, and specifically in our June meeting where over 17 members of the public came and each member spoke about the lack of trust and the lack of desire to have a police representative on this body. Again, in our August meeting, and we once again heard that in our special meeting in February after the incident that we had in our city. We've also had coffee and conversation hours where this issue has come up, and the HRC had over 4 hours of discussion specifically on this topic as well. And the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards is comprised of only members, representatives from other Michigan departments of police departments. And so it is, in my opinion, I have listened to the public comment brought to me by members of the public to the HRC, and I have heard resoundingly that this is not something that will bring public trust, which is one of the key issues that we are trying to resolve here with this body, is the lack of public trust, the lack of social justice, and the lack of ability to have racial justice in our community. And the fact of the matter is, when you have someone from that body on there, our community has told us that they do not feel safe with that. They told us that they do not feel like that will be the way to start the healing that our community needs to have. And I think it is the most respectful thing to do is to respect that public comment that our community members have brought to us. Out of every single point item, we have discussed this resolution over the course of the last year and a half. This has been brought up at, I would say, about 11 HRC meetings. We've had over 30 hours of in-meeting discussion about this. And the number one thing that has always been brought up is community members do not feel safe with having a police representative on that body. That is why you see in the resolution sent to council in November, that was removed, because after months and months of public comment and hours of commission comment and discussion, we came to the conclusion that as the body tasked with protecting the human dignity, that it was the best thing to do for us to remove that and ensure that our citizens were able to have full trust in this body, as that's what the foundation of this body is doing. And so I really caution council to require that the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards has a standing voting seat that's on this commission, because it will destroy the foundation of the trust that the community needs to have when they're moving forward with this. We recognize that there needed to be some sort of representative that understands police protocol and trainings. And we did put in our original bill that someone could be reached out to as a liaison, that we could reach out. We would have an identified person to consult on these issues, as we recognize that members of the public and members of the HRC and University Student Commission would not necessarily be able to fully understand the breadth of police policy, and that we would be able to, at our will, discuss and reach out to a police liaison. But to have a police liaison from this commission have a voting member undermines the very thing that our citizens and community has brought to us in various public comment over the last year and a half. And so that, to me, when I saw that, was deeply concerning, and I want to ensure that that is reflected back here at this city council meeting. And again, I am the chair of the very body in the city meant to protect the human dignity of this city, and this to me runs counter when we aren't listening to that of the voices of our citizens, when they have resoundingly told us this does not make us feel safe. This does not make us feel like trust is being rebuilt. This does not feel like this commission is in the effort and pursuit of racial justice. Then we need to listen to those voices.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. To the next
Thank you,
caller,
Mayor.
please.
Thank you. The next caller is the phone number ending in 432. Caller number ending in 432, you may now address council.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Sorry about that, I had it on mute. Thank you, Chuck Grigsby here, East Lansing resident. I just want to say thank you guys for really addressing this and taking this serious. Seems like this has been in talks for a while now, and I'm happy to have some movement on this. I also want to acknowledge Jesse Gregg for reaching out to me and really having a great in-depth discussion about these issues in our city and how to move forward in healing, and just really working on some of the things that have been in place for a long period of time. I guess I have an issue with creating this body here for going forward and really addressing issues that have been in place for a little while now. I just would like to challenge the council, the body council, to not rely upon the formation of this committee and the time frame that it takes for this commission to do the work that needs to be done in a more in-depth focus, but really challenge you guys and gals, and to really challenge you to really work on these issues now. There's certain things that within my written communication that I gave prior to this meeting that, you don't have to have a new body created to have some of these things improve. Some of the outcry that you've had over and over and over at public council and meetings from your community that would really show, as the previous caller was talking about, building that trust, that orientation of showing us, the community, that this is a number one issue for you. This is a priority for you. You did hear the council courtroom that was packed, that I've never seen before since I've been here in East Lansing, of people participating on one single issue in a way that they need to be heard and respected. So I guess my whole point of what I'm saying to you is I really would like to see movement from the council previous to the commission being, the Oversight Commission being addressed. And then on a side note, I would like to hear your thoughts or comments on the state police outcome in the investigation that was held with one of our East Lansing police officers. I'm curious to see how you guys feel about that whole process and the outcome to what we got, where we're going forward. That's all I had. If anyone had any questions, I would defer my time to that.
Any questions from council? Councilmember Stevens?
Hey, thank you for joining us, Chuck, even remotely. Hope you're doing well. So I have a couple of things. So one, I heard the concern about working while this this committee is being formed. And I'll just say, and I can only, of course, speak for myself, but I told this to another member of the community that reached out to me about it. I don't view this committee that's looking to form a committee as our end all be all, right? I don't think it's going to be something where if we have issues that we want to address in the next, or at least I have issues that I want to address in the next, 6 months or however long they take, I would never comment something towards the effect of, well, there's a commission working on it. I know that is a concern. I think that is a valid concern because occasionally, people in positions of power do want to skirt off that responsibility. But I hope that this council is very committed to not approaching it in that way. And I think we're all ready to address, of course, I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, but I think at least on my end, I'm very happy to address issues as they come up and not just say, well, this commission's working on it. So I do appreciate that comment, but I did want to put that out there.
Any other comments from council? Councilmember Meadows, then Councilmember Gregg.
Let me just say that I'll just say ditto to what the Mayor Pro Tem just said. I don't think there's any intention for us to not address the issues that we saw develop. Those are procedural issues. Those are things that happened during the course of an arrest, how arrests are made, things like that. This commission, as I understand it anyway, is to develop a process for which we can have citizen review of complaints that are made against the police department. So I think there are two different things. I don't think anybody here is thinking that we aren't going to address issues as they arise during the interim period.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregg.
Thanks. I echoing what my fellow council members have said, I don't see the creation of this commission as a solution to the problem. I see this as one tool in the toolbox to work on the problem. So that is a commission, that is a tool that will be used, but there's other tools that we will continue to use outside of that. Just in Mr. Grigsby's question about the state police investigation results, I think I'm not particularly surprised by those results. I think that, you know, the use of force that is authorized is different than the use of force that's appropriate. So I think even if that body found that that use of force was not excessive, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have a problem. So I think, you know, that does not absolve us from responsibility in addressing this. So
Thank you.
that's what I want.
Thank you. Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. Mr. Grigsby, I agree with Councilmember Gregg and the others, and I want to make a commitment to you that this will not be death by committee. Thank you.
And just to put a little bit of meat on that, what we've done so far since the incident was we have added a data field to all arrests, actually all, not arrests, to all officer initiated contact, so that we can see if there's an overrepresentation of minorities in officer initiated stops. The police are going to be trained as soon as they can physically be together on a way to eliminate the head tactic that was used that resulted in injury 2 times and complaints at other times. And we recently got a draft resolution from a member of the public to work with our lobbyists to expunge the records of people who are arrested and then found not to be guilty or just released. We found out last month that those records stay even when the person didn't do anything wrong. So those are 3 things just specifically that we are working on while this committee is picking the commission. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor Byer. I agree with all those things, and I think those are good initiatives. And I appreciate the rest of the council hopefully are echoing exactly what I said. So that means that it wasn't too bad that I spoke on behalf of the council in that situation. But as a response to your last question, I think the issue is, you know, having a police oversight commission is just something that we need to have. That end result of the state police investigation didn't necessarily change that for me. One of the reasons why I think the HRC, myself and even other members of council were looking to explore this beyond a year ago now is because it's just necessary. This is a job that involves interaction with the public, and it's a job that involves a sense of power over the public, which means that there needs to be extra oversight. And so that state police investigation didn't change that for me. I still think that we need to have this commission, and we need to continue working to make sure that everybody feels safe. Thanks.
And just so everybody is aware, this is on the agenda as a public meeting tonight. So there's another chance to make comments about this. And I will also be looking for a public hearing, sorry. Is that right? No.
No, it's on the business agenda.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Setting a public hearing.
Take it all back. Yes, right. We're setting the public hearing, but I will be looking for amendments from other council people tonight so that we have a version that everybody feels comfortable with as we go toward setting the public meeting.
Yeah,
That's
as a side note, I have a couple of those. So
good. All right, Ms. Bart, anybody else? Ms. Bartel, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next caller is number ending in 660. Caller ending in 660. You may now address council.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
My name is Farhan Sheikh Umar, Lansing resident. First, I want to thank all of you guys for your tremendous work. And while I am excited to see this body finally act and try to bring real progress to the city, I still have doubts, and I'm very respectful about some of the things that have been done and said. One of the most important things that we need to address before we even create this committee is the elephant in the room, which is Officer Stevenson. This is an officer that for the past 2 years has had 42% of public complaints against him. This is an officer that within 6 weeks has used excessive force against 2 unarmed and innocent black men. I don't know about you, but as someone who works for the school district, if I got 42% of grievances against me from parents or students, although I didn't break the law, there's no way that school district will still hire me. So my question is very clear. Are you guys satisfied with the investigation from the Michigan State Police? And 2, what are you guys going to do as a city council to hold Officer Stevenson accountable? Because the truth is, no one in their right mind would purchase a house next to a burning house. So we can't create a committee when there's fire already going on. So the first thing we need to do is put out this fire. And we need to hold Officer Stevenson accountable. We need to release all the video footage from the December incident that took place in 2019. The Michigan State Police has concluded their investigation. The East Lansing Police has concluded their investigation. There's no need for you guys to hold on to the video footage from that incident. You can't preach, Mayor, you cannot preach transparency for the past 4-6 months and then not show it. All I hear is talking. All I hear is talking from all of you guys and no action. It is time that we practice what we preach. And if we're going to preach transparency, then we can't pick and choose when to be transparent. We need to be transparent at all times. So before we even start this committee, let's focus on what's happening. Let's address the real elephant in this room, and tell me how you guys gonna hold this police officer accountable. What are you guys gonna do to keep us safe? So go ahead.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. Any comments from council? Councilmember Stevens?
So in the release that was there, and I'm going to look to the city manager on confirmation of this.
Hang on, Councilmember Stevens. Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So on this particular issue, I have been working with the county prosecutor to get that video released, and we were waiting to talk to the police first about this, but since it's come up, that video will be released. The only thing that will be redacted is the license plate number and another number, a lien number, LIEN number. So the video itself will be released.
Okay.
When will it be released?
Well, I just wrote the letter today. Today is Tuesday. I imagine it will be released tomorrow. Does that seem reasonable, Mr. Lohanas?
Yes, they'll be getting, I don't know if it'll be tomorrow, but they'll be getting it on the web within the next day or two, I'm certain.
So all videos, all footage, body camera, and from the vehicle will be released tomorrow.
That's my understanding. I don't think there's anything left that we are holding on to for the purposes of not harming an investigation or a prosecution.
Okay, and then my other question was, are you satisfied with the Michigan State Police? What are you going to do as a mayor of this city and as an elected official to hold this police officer accountable? Because this police officer literally clocks in and clocks out to look for black people. It shows that he has used the same tactic move on black people. It shows that for the past 2 years, 42% of complaints, public complaints, have been filed against him. So if that is not sounding off alarms, I don't know what is. If that's not enough evidence, I don't know what is. So what are you going to do as the mayor of this city to ensure our safety?
Thank you. Before I answer, Councilmember Stevens, were you finished? I'm sorry, I just didn't want you to say things that weren't true anymore.
I was going to just ask about the press release in the comments that was made about the prosecutor's office and ask for an update on that. But
okay.
No, you can go ahead and respond.
Okay. Mr. Lahanas, can you explain what the police procedure is at this point with the officer involved?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
So one of the things when you ask for an outside review of a criminal case like this, in some way you're actually turning over your authority in a sense to an outside agency to give you an investigation. That's what they did. So one of the challenges now is that for us to take action after the Michigan State Police, which is supposed to be an expert agency that can look at these types of things, found no wrongdoing on behalf of the officer, I think that from that perspective, from the labor perspective, that issue has been decided. From our perspective, while the Michigan State Police found that there was no excessive force in this case, we also said that we were not satisfied with the fact that these two men were injured during these physical hands-on interactions. And because of that, the chief, back when this was found out, immediately said that they wanted to change that procedure, and this control of the head technique, which was supposed to be a safer technique, we've discontinued that. And then you mentioned that in a formal training, we will not be utilizing that technique again in the future. And only, I believe the chief said, in the most extreme situations of safety. So at this point, I think it's the direction from the chief, and I agree with it strongly, is to change the training procedures on how they effectuate these arrests to try to eliminate the chance of people getting hurt like that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
For me?
No, from council. Councilmember Stevens?
I'd just like to refer back to a comment that Councilmember Gregg made that I think was very apt. Just because something is found to be, I don't remember what the word you used was, possibly justified, does not necessarily mean it was appropriate. Authorized, that is the better word. Just because something was authorized does not necessarily mean it was appropriate. And that'll leave my comment for a secondary question. Thank you.
I have a quick question for the city manager. Is that fine?
Yeah, sure.
While Mr. Gacito's case was taking place, the Mr. Anthony's case was already completed. Why did it take so long for the city manager and the police department to not only share that case with the public, but with you guys? When is he going to start being transparent? When are you guys going to start holding him accountable for not being transparent, being transparent with you guys?
Thank you. I actually consider that question to me, not to the city manager. So that was an error. It wasn't an error on the part of the city manager. When we found out about it, was the same day that he found out about it. What happened was the first case was not logged under the same name, the same officer's name as the second case, and it took a while to make the connection, and that was a mistake. And the interim chief has put procedures into place for that not to happen again.
And what are those procedures?
I don't know. So I don't know if you understand the way council manager kind of government works. Is we set the tone, we set we pass the codes, and we direct the city manager, but the city manager directs the chief, and the chief directs the officers. So it wouldn't be something that I would not necessarily get involved in unless I was looking closely at it, which I will be. And I will promise you that for the rest of my term, we are going to be looking very closely at every officer interaction with minority and other people when force is involved. So this is not something we're just going to wash our hands of because we got a ruling that it was not out of bounds according to the Michigan State Police. So I think that
just a quick thing, Mayor.
Yeah,
I understand
sure.
you said it was a mistake. You said it was a mistake, and that the interim chief has put in measures to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. But you haven't told me what those measures are. So
no, I mean,
are you aware of the measures?
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean that he's put in measures to make sure that we don't have people getting injured. That's always been there. I'm talking about to make sure the particular cases that involve force that should be tied to other cases will be tied. He told me he was going to do that. I didn't ask him what computer system he was going to use to do that. I just assumed that he would. But you're right. I should check up on that and make sure it's happening.
also going
Okay, I think
forward, the
that's been
police.
well over 5 minutes, sir. So we're going to go to the next caller. Thank you. Miss, who is doing this again?
Ms.
Oh,
Bartel.
Bartel.
Thank you. The next caller on the list is the caller with phone number ending in 398. Caller number 398, you may now address council. (398). Just wanted to give you another opportunity if you'd like to address council. Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we will move on to the next caller. The next caller is a phone number ending in 932. 932, you may now address council.
Hi, this is Liz Miller, member of the HRC. Speaking on the resolution that you guys are going to be talking about, thank you guys for, even during this interim time for moving this forward. First of all, I hugely appreciate that. And I know that's been really important to the broader community. I'm concerned that the mayor is named as a voting member of the committee and the chair. This should be an independent group with a council member liaison. Having the mayor specifically as a member and chair is counter to that goal. It sends a message to the public of the council wanting to control the outcome rather than seeking to find the most qualified citizen to serve and to lead us in this work. I'm also concerned that the mission stated in the resolution is incredibly broad. To Councilmember Meadows' point, the committee's goal is to create the structure for complaints and independent oversight. So taking testimony and reviewing evidence about the relationship between our police departments and the public seems like it's the role of the eventual commission that it's formed, not this committee that should focus on the structure for that eventual work, especially if they're going to be doing that within a 6-month time period. So those were my two biggest concerns, and thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you for coming on, Pastor Miller. I share the same concern regarding council being involved in the process, and I've drafted an amendment for tonight that actually is just in with accordance of what you said, which is a council liaison that's a non-voting member. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Any other comments? Just a clarification, I actually don't have a problem with that, but I don't want the public to be confused about the proposal. The proposal is to create a committee to recommend how we create the commission. So the mayor would not be on the commission. This is just the committee itself. And the idea was just to make sure it gets everything it needs, that it operates as a city committee. But I am open to any amendments, of course, when we get to that part of the agenda. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I think that's very clear. And I just think from a public perspective, the details, who you appoint to that committee, who is charged with leading the work, sends a very clear message to the public about what the scope and importance or goals of that eventual commission will be.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Bartel.
The next caller on the list is a phone number ending in 753. Caller 753, you may now address council.
Hello, my name is Edmund Rushton. I've been at the last few meetings. I unfortunately missed the one it was about 2 weeks ago now. I was just looking over the resolution for the community, the Police Community Relations Review Committee. And if I'm getting this right, based on what you all were just discussing, the role of the mayor are we planning to switch that from chair to liaison? Is that correct?
We're not planning anything. The way this works is when it comes up for discussion and on the business agenda, which is item 5.1, if a council person wants to make an amendment, so that would be to amend the resolution as it is now to change the mayor from a voting member to a liaison, or to take the mayor out completely, that's when that would happen. So we don't know what's going to happen until we actually discuss and vote on the resolution.
Okay.
On actually scheduling the resolution.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. I just wanted to make sure, clear the air on that one. I remember we discussed at the last meeting how direct superiors to police personnel running the oversight of police personnel would cause quite the conflict of interest, since usually the direct superior is the one with the most to lose. I think we were all pretty much in agreement on that, so I'm glad we're moving forward, or at least it sounds like we're moving forward with an amendment to that. It doesn't really matter to me whether or not the mayor stands as a liaison or a non-voting member, or is not on the committee entirely. That I could go either way on that, as long as they're not the head chair. My second question is number 8 on the rules, or the resolutions here, stating that there will be one member of the Michigan State University administration. Really, I guess 2 questions on that. One, why is it going to be why was it suggested that it should be a non-voting member? And also, would this be just strictly from the administration office, or would it be like a Michigan State faculty?
So I met with a group of citizens that was interested in this resolution, and we talked about that issue, and their request that it not be a voting member, because this is an East Lansing issue, not a Michigan State University issue, in the sense that our resolution will not cover them. Our police commission, our oversight commission for the police, will not cover an MSU officer. So I wanted MSU involved, because when something is happening, there's often a mixture of officers, and if there are problems in East Lansing, there well may be problems on campus. So
Okay.
I would like to be able to coordinate with them, but the citizens that I was talking to did not want them to be a voting member. So the only thing that they requested is that the person not be a police affiliated person at MSU, and it could well be a faculty member. It could be somebody with experience in this. We're looking for somebody that has, a lot to offer.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that all sounds good to me. I can think of, I work a lot with criminal justice faculty members at Michigan State, and there are a lot of very bright minds on there. So I would suggest even maybe adding in a 9th amendment to this, suggesting that one spot on the committee is specifically reserved for a member of Michigan State faculty. Whether they're voting or non-voting, I'll leave that up to you. You all probably have a better grip of whether or not that should be the case than me. And my last question is regarding the Anthony Loggins case. I think this would be more for City Attorney Yeadon. I know Anthony Loggins personally, and I haven't seen him since December. And after learning that he was the one involved, that makes a lot more sense to me. So I've been calling around trying to figure out where he is and if he's being incarcerated in ICJ or whatnot. And I've been given some conflicting information from different offices, from personnel affiliated with the East Lansing Police. They have said, well, the reasoning why they couldn't even release his body camera footage, I was told, was because he had not yet been arraigned. And then when I talked to the public defender who had worked on Mr. Loggins' representation, he had said that Mr. Loggins' case, he no longer needed representation. He was not in jail. It sounded like his case had ended. So I'm just curious if you can say here and now whether or not Mr. Loggins has been arraigned, because it is now almost 6 months after the fact. And the Department of Justice says that within 72 hours of an arrest, someone is supposed to be arraigned. And in other states, it's the most I've ever seen is up to 70 days. However, we are well past that. And by the time that everything got locked down by COVID, we were already well past 70 days. I think that was like the 85 day mark since Mr. Loggins' arrest. So can you confirm whether or not Anthony Loggins has been arraigned?
Can you, Tom, you're muted.
That's not the city of East Lansing's case. That case is being prosecuted by the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, so I don't have firsthand knowledge about his status. My understanding, however, is that the warrant is out for him and he has not been arrested on that warrant yet, and that's why he's not been arraigned. So that's my understanding, but that's not with any firsthand knowledge.
So he must have been bailed out night of then. Maybe you don't have that information. Okay, well, that all sounds pretty good to me. This seems to check out pretty well. I'm just looking over this resolution one more time to make sure I'm not missing anything. So tonight, we're not voting on what this committee will be reviewing and what it won't be reviewing, and its guidelines for its procedures and codes of conduct. Tonight is more just a vote based on establishing the committee and who will be on the committee. Is that correct?
Even one step back, tonight's vote is to schedule the meeting on the 26th to vote to establish the committee. The reason we're doing this twice, which is one more time than usual, is so that citizens can comment twice, so that you can get on now and say, I don't like this and that, we can amend it, and then we'll hear it again on the 26th, and then we may well amend it then. So it seems like there are a lot of steps, but because we're virtual, I wanted to make sure we can have as many people as possible commenting on this. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, fantastic. And last comment, this might be difficult, but I was just hoping that either you or City Attorney Yeadon could get some more information on Mr. Logan's case and whether or not he has been arraigned, because when I talked to the Public Defender's Office, they said that there was a non-public classification on his case, and that struck me as odd. I know a lot of criminal justice attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, and prosecutors who've all said that they rarely ever see non-public classifications on criminal cases. It's usually used in civil cases, and the only instances when it's normally used in criminal cases is if someone is pleading public insanity, which it doesn't sound like we're at that process yet in Mr. Logan's case. So do any of you know why this non-public classification was placed on the case of Anthony Loggins?
Mr. Yeadon, do you have any idea?
I do not. I have
Thank
no
you.
idea.
Councilmember
Okay,
Gregg,
so
I think Councilmember Gregg had a question for you or a comment.
Sure.
Comment.
Yeah.
I just want to further clarify. I think Ruth tried to clarify this earlier, but I just want to further clarify. We are not talking about creating the Citizen Oversight Committee. Even the ordinance that we are voting on tonight would create a task force to research Citizen Oversight Committee procedure and then recommend to us what that eventual task committee, there's committee, task force, there's too many different words for groups floating around here. So this is one step back from anything that would be a review committee. This is to talk about how the review committee should function. So I just want to make sure that we are totally clear that we are not talking about procedures yet.
Sure, I completely get that.
Okay.
But I was just hoping that somebody would look into this non-public classification on Mr. Logan's case and get some clarity as to why that classification is on Mr. Logan's case, and hopefully you might be able to provide us with more information by the 26th as to why the procedure going into Mr. Logan's legal future is sort of has the smoke screen over it right now because it can't be accessed in court records. So could somebody get some more information on that by the 26th?
It's not really our case, but I really don't know that it's our place to do that. If you called the Ingham County prosecutor, do you think you can get the answer there?
I talked to them, and they said that they could only tell me that Mr. Loggins was not in jail at this time. They couldn't offer me any more information regarding whether or not he was being arraigned or had already been arraigned or was having a hearing. They said there was this non-public classification on his case, which they don't see very often. And I'm just curious as to, because I called them after the investigation was wrapped up. So there was no pending investigation or anything like that that was still hanging over him. So it's just puzzling to me. I'm just trying to figure out why there's this non-public classification on Mr. Loggins' case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yep, Ms. Bartel?
Thank you, Mayor. That completes the public comment section. We have no more callers.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is communications from the mayor and city council members. Let's see who looks ready. Ooh, I think I'll start with Councilmember Greg.
Thanks, Ruth.
Yes.
I don't have any specific comments outside. I have comments on specific items on the agenda that I'll comment when we get to them. I have kind of continued to try to reach out to members of our business community. It's been pretty difficult to have clear lines of communication with everyone distance and everything changing so rapidly. But I just want to reiterate my personal commitment to get as many East Lansing businesses through this very difficult time as possible. And I wanted to just make sure that any business owner and or a member of the public can contact me about anything at any time. And I am delighted to try and make time to talk with them. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. I was remiss last week and did not thank the Department of Public Works. There are a lot of folks who are showing up and doing jobs, and often, ironically, they're doing jobs that we don't hold in very high esteem. And we see that with grocery store employees, nurses, doctors are certainly getting a lot of credit, but there are CNAs, a lot of folks, phlebotomists who aren't getting the attention who deserve it. And close to home, DPW has been on it, and I'd like to thank them very much for continuing to work. They did one round of free leaf pickups. I understand they're doing another, and this time maybe it won't freeze on them. So from all of us, thank you, DPW. Mayor, you're on mute.
Councilmember Meadows.
Thank you, Mayor. I really don't have very many comments tonight, but I do want to sort of echo something that Councilmember Greg said. I really think that the biggest bang for our buck, and we are going to be talking about putting money into this, is going to be business support that we can provide in not only the downtown area, but other areas of the city. The pandemic has really hurt small businesses. And even though I think the council has been criticized in the past as sort of concentrating on big stores or national chains or something like that, we have a substantial number of small businesses, locally owned businesses in the city. And I'm hoping that we really can provide some financial support and other public support for them as we go forward, because each one of them will then pass on the money to employees who will spend money within our community. We really need to get this going again and as soon as possible. So that's all I've got to say.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor Byer. I only have one quick comment. I'll save other comments for items that are on the agenda later down the line. But I just want to say lately I have been seeing more and more folks walking around without masks, walking in groups that are bigger than two. We've gotten some, calls from folks that are worried about, parents letting their kids go outside and play in groups of, 10 or more. And I just want to say this, and I know that we're over a month into this quarantine, that this isn't done yet, that there are still a lot of risks. And the reason why the stay-at-home order is still in effect right now is because we need to be doing everything we can to protect folks. So I just encourage members of the community to please still keep on those boundaries and take every precaution. We're definitely not out of the woods yet, and we're going to have to be making these choices for a little bit of time here in the future. The next thing is just that I talked to the city manager a little bit about this before, but as we start to open city offices, I'd love to see opportunities for flex schedules or for staff to be, on halftime or not as many people focused in offices, and where that is an ability to do so. I know that some departments obviously don't have that ability, but just doing everything we can to make sure that we're not unnecessarily exposing our people as well. So that's all I got.
Okay, I have 3 things. First, I mentioned this last time, I just want to mention it again, is that the city is still running. The city is still at work, and we have a lot of essential employees that are out there doing their jobs and actually putting themselves at risk. And I just want to say thank you to every staff person who is working with other people. And thank you for every staff person who's trying to work at home and doing the best that you can. The city is functioning, and I'm just proud to be the mayor of such a well-oiled machine. The second thing is I got a call from a barber who owns a shop in East Lansing on Grand River, who obviously is not doing any haircuts. He was concerned because the city that he lives in, I think it's the mayor, decided to ignore the governor's recommendations and let their barbershops open. And he asked what our response was, and I just want to let everybody know that as far as I'm concerned, we will be following the governor's recommendations about that kind of thing. And when she changes them, then that's when we will change ours. And then finally, I've been reading and watching about what I consider the almost a hunting of Mr. Arbery, who was chased and shot essentially for jogging in his neighborhood. And the thing that moved me the most, that made me want to talk about it tonight, is that I feel pain about that. But when I read what African Americans write about it, I realize that my pain, just as a human, that other humans would do that to somebody, probably almost certainly because of their skin color. I'm sure that I don't have the same depth of pain and fear that the African American community has. So I just wanted to say that I understand that, and I'm glad that East Lansing is going forward with what we are doing to make sure something like that never happens here. And I do also want to point out that this was not a police-oriented thing. This was a family of people who thought it was a reasonable thing to do, to grab their guns and chase a man and shoot him. So when I talked about the problems that we may have in policing, I also mentioned that we have a problem in the community. We have people who call the police when they see Black people running through their neighborhood, just because they're running through their neighborhood. So I'm asking all citizens, all police officers, all city officials, all council people, all people in East Lansing to think twice before they let any kind of implicit or explicit bias be expressed. So that's all I have. We can move on to the next part of the agenda, which is city manager's report. I think you're muted, George. No?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Wanted to say thank you to council for the kind comments regarding staff. I'm sure they appreciate it. We have a lot of folks who've been working hard, so thank you to all of them as well. I also wanted to note that very appropriately, today is May 12, International Nurses Day, which is certainly a great time to thank all the nurses in our community and beyond for the brave effort and the great care they're providing to all of our sick COVID patients. So thank you for all that they do. That's all I have.
And next is the city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. No report this evening.
All right, moving on to item 3, the consent agenda. Mr. Lahanis.
Okay, we have the following items on the consent agenda for council consideration. Item 3.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. A, Paul Cervenak to the Library Board of Trustees for a full term ending June 2025. 3.2, approve a mural funding agreement with HBBM East Lansing LLC and the Albert Avenue Tower Condominium Association for installation of a mural by artist Lauren Asta on the eastern wall of the Center City Development, and authorize the city manager to sign. And furthermore, approve the expenditure of $19,800 from the Public Art Fund for this purpose. Item 3.3, approve the award of the fiscal year 2020 Interceptor Rehabilitation Project and as-needed sewer rehabilitation project to Institutiform, Technologies USA at a cost of $355,772.50 for the Part A Trowbridge Road Gourds Drain Interceptor Rehabilitation portion of the project, and a budgeted allocation of up to $500,000 for the Part B as-needed sewer rehabilitation portion of the project, and authorize the city manager to sign. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for council consideration.
Thank you. Would anybody like anything removed from the consent agenda? Does anybody have a question about the consent agenda? I move approval of the consent agenda. Could I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by the Mayor Pro Tem. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The consent agenda is adopted. The next item on the agenda is 4.1, our first public hearing, which is the consideration of the preliminary fiscal year 2021 budget and tax rates. Ms. Felposh.
Good evening. Each year, we're required to hold the budget and tax rate public hearing, which is what we're here to do tonight. Just to remind you, we published the budget in early April. We had a discussion last meeting, April 30th, and then we have another one tonight and another one scheduled for May 19th for specific funds. I can go through all that if you want, but I think you're well versed on that. The proposed fiscal year 21 total budget is $135.8 million. And the millage rates are the same as the prior year. So operating millage of 12.5362, solid waste of 1.825, and library of 1.994. So a total of 16.3552. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, but obviously this isn't the last conversation about the budget.
Any questions for Ms. Felposh? Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Would anybody from the public like to comment on this? If so, how are we doing this, Ms. Bartel?
I can just go through the callers. It looks like we have 3 on the line at this time.
Okay, would you do that, please?
Absolutely. The
Thank
first
you.
caller is the number ending in 534. If you would like to address council on this public hearing, you may now.
Hi, this is Ann Hillett, 685 Buteo. I'm calling regarding the budget. And first of all, I'd like to thank the staff and the finance director, Jill Felposh, for putting together everything for the 2021 budget. Clearly, a lot of work went into that. I do have a couple of comments that I'd like to share. Specifically, the overall headcount numbers since 2019 have increased significantly. When the income tax was presented to the voters, there were 3 main areas of concern. They were pension debt, infrastructure, and public safety, being police and fire. Overall, the full-time, part-time headcount has increased from a 2019 actual of 329 to a 2021 budget request of 349, which is an increase of 20 heads. Only 6 of those heads were in the combined police and fire budgets. Overall contingent hours increased from a 2019 actual of 106,452 hours to a 2021 budget request of 117,745 hours. And that gives us an increase of 11,293 hours, which would be equivalent to 5 to 6 full-time persons. Only 3,884 hours, or 1.5 full-time persons, were the combined police and fire budgets. In my opinion, the city really hasn't changed that much with regard to the city limits haven't been expanded. We haven't seen significant increases in population over the past few years. So I'm curious as to what specifically has changed to warrant those kinds of increases. And are we trying to expand the services that the city provides, including activities that are best handled by the private sector? If increases need to be made in other departments, in my opinion, I think we need to find offsetting departments to pull those resources from. Secondly,
Okay. Go ahead.
Secondly, the personnel costs across the board are increasing. Some of those are due to labor contracts, others are due to step increases and general compensation and benefit increases. And I recognize that we need to be able to make sure that we can retain high caliber employees, and we do that partially with compensation packages. But those increases also need to be offset by other cost reductions. By virtue of the voters passing the income tax initiative, only after including a finite end period and specific purposes where the money can be used, I believe that the voters were voicing consent that these items specifically, pension payments, public safety, and infrastructure, were a priority for the city of East Lansing. And until these priority areas are addressed, it would seem more prudent to decrease the emphasis on other areas that are nice but not absolutely necessary. And these comments are in looking at the budget from a pre-pandemic perspective. And I understand that it's going to change dramatically now that we're talking post-pandemic. So specifically, I think taking a look at the parks and rec activities, we've invested an enormous amount of money over the past decade into parks and rec, and that may be an area where we can let off a little bit and put more into perhaps road and water sewer. And I think that's pretty much all of those observations are pre-pandemic, and I really do thank everyone for all the work that they've done in pulling this budget recommendation together.
Thank you very much. You said you had 3. Was that the third one, the Parks and Rec?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Bartel, our next caller.
It looked like Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Stevens had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't
Thanks.
see you.
Sorry about that. So, Ann, thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving your comments remotely. I asked a couple of questions that are attached, I think, to the budget document regarding some of the staffing changes. What were the specifics that you were looking into overall as issue areas of investment that you didn't want to see?
I don't have them written down right in front of me as I was going through the whole budget. I looked at it summarily first and looked at the significant amount of head count. And again, I look at it from 2019, from where the voters said, yes, we agree to this income tax under these conditions, under these specific limitations. And I'm taking that into 2020 and then also into now we're 2021. And based on what we, the voters, said were priorities at that point in time, enough to have an income tax, I want to make sure that we're using all of our headcount in an appropriate way and putting the focus where it needs to be.
Sure, that makes complete sense. If you do ever want to talk about maybe a specific department or staffing issues, you can feel free to send a question to me, the council, or even, and we can get an answer for you as to why individual staffing changes, obviously on that document, are not necessarily noted as to what the reasonings are. I learned that, when a PACE supervisor was being taken away, it was actually because that position was going to be joint with a police supervisor. So that was something that I didn't know just by looking at the document. But I'm very happy to ask those questions if you have anything specific that you want to bring up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
From my perspective, I don't need to get into the weeds. I think that's the city manager's position. But from a taxpayer position, I do think it's important for me to raise the flag that I and a lot of the other folks that I hear from that live here in East Lansing are concerned about the income tax. And they're concerned that as we go through time, we will lose focus. And by the time we get to the projected end date, or that people will forget and will say, oh, our costs are too high. We still need to have this income tax and push it further out. And from what I'm hearing from folks, they're not very interested in that.
Okay.
So we need to manage our money now.
Thank you. I'd like to just respond if you're still on. Last year was actually a very good year for reasons other than the income tax. We had an increase in state shared revenue. We had an increase in our own other revenues and our property tax revenue in addition to the income tax. So, and for the previous 10 years, effectively, we've been shrinking and cutting back whenever we could. So I think what the city manager as the CEO of our company, which is the city, was doing was putting back positions that were vital that we had cut anyway. So I don't think any of the current council people are going to lose sight of our three commitments: the pension, the infrastructure, and police and fire. But I don't think that means that in 1 year we can't restore some positions that we need elsewhere as well. Although I think that's all going to be moot. Because I think in the coming year, the city manager is going to have to reverse quite a few of those decisions, unfortunately.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Bartel.
Thank you. The next caller is phone number ending in 180. 180. You may now address council.
Hi, I'm actually calling for the next 4.2 on the public hearing.
Okay, we will call you then. Thank you.
Okay, and the next caller is phone number ending in 398. 398, you may address council if you would like. One more opportunity to address council. Thank you. Those are the callers.
Thank you. We aren't taking any action on this tonight, so we will, that's correct, right? Mr. Lahanis? Yes, okay. Then we're going on
That's
to.
correct. If you want to hear any information from me, I'd be happy to talk about it further, but you sort of hit upon it about the staffing. But also I'd point out that those are a combination of full-time and part-time positions, so it doesn't necessarily mean we added 20 FTE. There could be a number of part-time positions in there. One area that I would say would be an example of positions that we've had to add, and we did cut very deeply into all departments in the city, was like the clerk's office. The clerk's office has had a tremendous amount of workload increase from the state in how we run elections. So we had 2 FTE or 2 FTE part-time, full-time headcount. Now we're up to 4. And you could question if that's even enough at this point, considering the workload that we've absorbed because of the state same-day voting registration. So that's an example of something where the state put an obligation on us to do things differently, and we've had to add staff because of that, and it's essential. Obviously, voting is essential. We have to do it right that day, but that's an example. I just want to point out that doesn't necessarily mean 20 full-time positions. Those could be part-time positions. The 6 public safety ones were full-time. And those were needed, but part-time as well. So I could certainly give a more in-depth answer if council would like to hear that at some point, but thanks for the comments.
Okay, the next item, 4.2, consideration of the fiscal year 21 community development block grant funds. And that will be, is that Ms. Schuessler? There she is. Ms. Schuessler-Schmidt, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good.
Yep.
So as city council members are aware, the city of East Lansing is a community development block grant entitlement community. As such, funds are allocated to provide resources to primarily benefit income eligible persons. Enclosed and placed on your screen, you will find the proposed fiscal year 21 budget recommendations, which focus upon public infrastructure, housing projects, and special economic development projects. The one change that I wanted to point out from the budget that was originally presented by the Finance Department a little bit earlier this spring is the possible funding of a small business grant relief program in the total amount of $121,820. The intent is that income eligible businesses might be able to apply for 2 rounds of funding. The first would be as part of the Community Development Block Grant CV funds, which we're going to discuss later in the evening. And then the second round would be as part of this entitlement budget, which runs from July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. I also want to point out that this is for program year 20. Program year 20 is Community Development Block Grant program year. It is fiscal year 21 for us. So that just to make that notation clear. No action is going to be taken tonight because the second public hearing is scheduled to be held on May 26, 2020. And at that time, there will be the request for a vote to be taken then. And I'm happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Okay, any questions for staff? Councilmember Meadows. Please unmute.
Unmute.
There you go.
Yes.
I got you. Ms.
And
Babcock.
how did we pick the 75 employee standard, Amy?
So staff did some research on other municipalities, and frankly, that was sort of the number used. You can go up to, the Small Business Administration really says up to 500 employees. So if it is, that is council's discretion. We essentially just base that off of a number that was being utilized by some other municipalities nationwide. So there is no requirement.
I'd like to,
question.
when we go forward with this, I'd like to have a little more information on sort of how that breaks out in the city of East Lansing. In other words, which businesses would qualify? Because I want to make sure we get this money to small businesses and sort of mom and pop operations.
Sure.
More than say, for all I know, Harper's has 75 employees, and I'm not so sure they need the money. Okay.
Councilmember Gregg.
I just checking my mute status. Sorry there. I had a question about the wording in the basic eligibility requirements where the applicant can prove. So the applicant would be the business owner, right? The 51% majority owner of the business. Applicant can prove that owner and or employees meet necessary income requirements. The and or, I don't know, it just opens up like a very vague, I imagine there's plenty of businesses where the owner would not meet the income eligibility requirements, but their employees would. There's a lot of part-time, hourly employees working at some businesses that are owned by some fairly affluent people. And so how are we ensuring that the funds that go through this program are going to be used? I don't know. It's like, I know this is in the beginning stages, but it just seems really vague to me.
Sure. So the requirement or the thought process of staff is that an application would be created that would be reviewed by City Council during the next meeting. In the application itself, we require that business owners, or it would be the recommendation of staff, that they not only self-certify, but that they provide financial proof, right? So in other words, if I'm a small business owner, I need to prove, if I am not income eligible, I need to prove that my employee is income eligible and provide backup documentation. Perhaps that's tax forms, perhaps that's payroll. It could be a variety of supplemental materials that can be at City Council's discretion. There's two sort of HUD ways to do that. They're a little bit different. There's something called a 1040 and a Part 5. Essentially, the main difference is what counts as income and what does not. Main areas of discretion are really, just so you're aware, usually it's primarily whether or not you get to count child support or not. But there are some income requirements. But that being said, the HUD guidance does state that the municipality determines that. So as long as, for example, you're proving that the family of four meets the income, council in the city of East Lansing gets to determine how that threshold was determined, if that makes sense to everybody. So that's how HUD kind of recommends or states that it needs to occur.
Okay, and then what types of, so this is dispersed as a grant to the business owner, and then does that have to go to payroll? Are there other stipulations about how it's spent in terms of the business?
I think the recommendation or initial thought process of staff is that it would be potentially based upon payroll, utilities support, things of that nature, that it would not be geared towards any new construction of any sort, build out of any sort, that it would be, we're kind of trying to address that immediate need of businesses in staying.
The overhead. Yeah.
Correct, the overhead. Yep.
Okay,
Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. Just another question under basic eligibility. It says applicant is 51% plus majority owner of businesses. What would happen if you had a two-person partnership?
Well, I think that the applicant that's applying, right? So the individual that's the 51% majority owner, that individual would need to apply on behalf of the business. So the 49% owner, or if you're anything other than 51%, you would not be eligible to apply.
Right. Do we know if this is going to affect any of our businesses? Because oftentimes, for instance, with small law firms, it'll be a 50-50 partnership. And I can imagine that's also true in retail or restaurant. You've got a 50-50 split, and I'd be concerned about them being left out. So
certainly. And I can re-review. I think that I was basing that off of the guidance from HUD. I don't think that is a programmatic requirement, if that makes sense. So if, for example, city council determines that they want somebody to have a 20% equity, I'm happy to do some research into that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I think there's, to that point, there's businesses that are, 40-40-20, or not even that tidy. Is there a way for two owners to co-apply to make a majority owner? Or the business, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that the in that case, I would recommend that a majority shareholder apply on behalf of the business.
Okay, so like if the highest percentage is 47%, then that person should be the person to apply. Okay.
That is what I would recommend, yes. And that individual needs to prove that either through their percentage they're income eligible or the employees on their payroll are income eligible.
Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows.
I just want a little bit of clarification. This majority ownership requirement is actually a requirement of the guidances, or is this something that we've just plugged in? Okay, then based on the conversation that we've had so far, I really think that we need to adjust this so that we don't prohibit a owner from making an application. So that takes care of, I think, the partnership issues that were raised by other council members, and that'll take care of any problem that we might have going forward with this. Ultimately, nobody's going to apply for this unless they know everybody else who's involved in the business wants it done too. Otherwise, we'll run into some trouble at the business as opposed to in our estimation of the validity of the application. So I suggest we make that change.
Councilmember Gregg.
Just so the grant that's paid out would be paid out to the business, not to the individual that applies.
That's correct.
So I think to Mark Meadows' point,
that's
really
correct.
any owner with an interest in the business could apply as long as they didn't have any pushback from their partners, since it's coming to the business, not the individual. I think that's fine.
Mr. Yaden.
Yeah, just so council is aware, I think the concern from the federal guidelines is that they don't want a minority shareholder to be the one who's income qualified, like a 2% owner, to be the one that's income qualified and therefore be able to get a grant when the majority shareholders would not otherwise be eligible. Is that your understanding, Amy?
I think the and or employees part kind of makes that a moot point, though, because like any, your part-time bar back is going to be a, income eligible employee, even if your $1 million or millionaire owner is not. So that wouldn't make them ineligible.
Okay, I just wanted to raise that.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I think to that point, you could certainly take out the and or, just make it the proprietor. Has to be.
No, because I think the people I'm most concerned about are those part-time employees, especially in the service industry. That's the most devastated sector of our economy right now. So any money that we can keep flowing to keep those people working and employed is where I'd like to put the money. So
right. And I know we're going to talk, I know I'm up several times tonight, but the thought of the staff is that, you know, it is a grant opportunity. CDBG funds are generally reimbursed. And so they have to provide us with proof, right? They have to provide us with proof that that individual continues to maintain payroll, that they give us some certified payroll through that grant opportunity.
Because it is a CBDG grant.
Correct.
Councilmember Stevens, did you have something? No is fine.
Sorry, Mayor. No, I agree with everything that was stated regarding the businesses. Good conversation around the majority owner. I was just wondering on the housing assistance, just are we waiting on basically approval from HUD for that program or passage even here on that program to create more of a timeline for that?
So for the housing assistance program, that is that could be funded in one of two ways. Right now, currently this evening, it's not part of this particular budget you're discussing. It's part of, it's under consideration of the CV funds. I have personally, however, received written confirmation from our HUD rep that it could be spent in either area. If council was to determine to approve it as part of the CV funds though, however, which we're going to talk about later tonight, the access to the funds is faster. So in other words, those funds might begin to be expended as early as, you know, July, forgive me, really end of June could be the earliest they'd probably be expended versus August when the new round of funds, which is what this public hearing pertains to, could be. Either program it is eligible for. That guidance has shifted in the last couple of weeks. So the last time you heard from me on April 30th, we did not believe it was eligible. I've since received written confirmation that it is, which is great news for everybody. And I must tell you that a lot of municipalities were made aware of that last week. And so a lot of municipalities have now considered, based on, I guess I should say, based on the webinar, that a lot of municipalities have indicated that they were interested in then drawing down as part of CV funds, not entitlement funds, just because of the access to the funding timeline.
Okay.
So, does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it did. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? All right, this is a public hearing. So Ms. Bartel, will you please call the numbers?
Yes, the first caller is a phone number ending in 180. You may now address council.
Thank you. This is, I'm Raleigh Van Fossen. I'm the Executive Director of Capital Area Housing Partnership. And thank you, Amy, Tom, and team for inviting me to be on tonight's call. And thank you to everybody at council, the mayor, and so forth for hosting this and making it easy as a member of the community to access that in light of all of what we're dealing with in the coronavirus world. I just wanted to briefly comment and mention our continued support and partnership with the city of East Lansing and utilizing community development block grant dollars within the city limits for two programs, our homeownership assistance program, in other words, referred to as HOPE, and then our City of East Lansing homeowner rehab, both of which are being considered in next year's budget for continual funding. Both of those programs have been under operation and in partnership with Capital Area for a handful of years. The HOPE program began all the way back in 1994, and the homeowner rehab program began in 2012. Briefly, the HOPE program offers financial assistance in the form of a down payment, as well as repairs related to code-related issues for folks who are looking to purchase properties here in the city of East Lansing. It's really a unique method that we as a community can come together and support first-time home buyers in making that commitment to call East Lansing home. We're actually happy to announce that this past Friday, we completed a virtual closing, albeit for 1204 Wolf Court in East Lansing, which now has a new homeowner who has moved in this weekend and did utilize the HOPE funds, which allowed him to move to East Lansing and make his new home on Wolf Court. So the program continues to receive active applications from folks in the community. On the homeowner rehab side, that's a program that assists current homeowners in necessary home repairs to allow them to continue that sense of home ownership. And the repairs are related largely to mechanicals and accessibility issues that allow them to stay safely in their home. Again, we continue to receive interest from folks in the community to access those program dollars and encourage your continued support through the Community Development Block Grant. I intend to be on the call, not just for this portion of the public hearing, but as well as the CDBG COVID portion, if I can be helpful in answering any questions. But again, thank you, Mayor Byer and Council for allowing me time to speak.
Thank you. The next caller, Ms. Bartel.
Thank you. The next caller is phone number ending in 963. You may address council at this time.
Hi, this is Alice Drager, 621 Sunset Lane. We had a couple of suggestions, one of which is that you actually audit those programs that were just mentioned. When I've looked at them, I've been frankly kind of shocked at how few people are assisted for the amount of money that goes into it. It's possible that those people are substantially assisted, but when I look at what renters might be able to benefit from as opposed to homeowners, it's kind of surprising to see the amount of money being spent on one family at a time. My second comment is a concern in general with the way the city of East Lansing has used CDBG funds. Historically speaking, the way that the city has decided to do this is to target areas that are supposedly low income. But it looks, from looking at the maps and looking at the history of this, that what's really occurred is that the city has taken advantage of areas where students live to discover that they supposedly have low income areas. This strikes me as disingenuous because of the way in which the city of East Lansing has, for example, decided that the social equity program for marijuana doesn't really apply to us because our average income is in fact depressed by student income that isn't really independent income, it's dependent income. So it troubles me that year after year after year, the city of East Lansing has chosen to use money that is supposed to go to low income people and used it instead to build sidewalks in areas that are not in fact low income in a meaningful way. There's no question we have poverty in the city of East Lansing, but it's not in downtown in the Bailey neighborhood where sidewalks have traditionally been built. There is a program, for example, that was done on Bircham Road to rebuild a retaining wall and a sidewalk, not the one on Abbott Road. This was one on Bircham Road. And the properties that benefited there were 2 sororities and a rental house that's owned by a wealthy landlord. So I have to question whether or not that's appropriate use of money that has been designed for low-income people. You're all familiar with the one that happened on Abbott Road. And in the defense of that use of those monies, the city manager told HUD that the reason it was legitimate is because low and moderate income people might walk on that sidewalk. This is, to my mind, bordering on obscene in terms of our use of federal funding meant for low and moderate income people. So as you consider using this money, I would ask that we try to develop a system that is not disingenuous, that actually helps the people this federal money was meant for. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next caller, Ms. Bartel.
Thank you. The final caller on the list is phone number ending in 398. If you wish to address council on this public hearing, you may do so now. One more time, this is caller 398. Thank you. And I apologize for the redundancy in that number. Just because of the way the call that is set up, I just make sure that we're not skipping someone who may wish to address the council on a certain item.
No, I appreciate that. That's what we've asked you to do because that's the only way we can make sure everybody gets to talk. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yep, and that's the end of the caller list for this item.
Thank you. The next item is 4.3, consideration of the renewal of the special assessment role for the assessment district number 75 in conjunction with the Downtown Management Board. Ms. Schuessler-Smith.
Thank you. So in January of 1997, the city of East Lansing established a principal shopping district, which is also commonly referred to as the Downtown Management Board District. Through that designation, City Council is able to review and consider renewal of a special assessment that is collected upon a time period determined by City Council each time. The DMB primarily focuses all of its efforts on marketing, events, and business relations of the 194 businesses within the district. It does collect a modest assessment of 8 cents per square foot on the first floor, 5 cents per square foot on the second. The basement is 4 cents per square foot, and then 3 cents for all other levels. The assessment rate has actually not changed since the inception of the Downtown Management Board. It has remained the same. This evening, this is the first of 2 public hearings, with the second public hearing being held on May 26, 2020. And I am happy to answer any questions council may have.
Any questions for staff? Okay, this is a public hearing. Would any member of the public like to speak on this item? Ms. Bartel.
Thank you. Again, this is caller 180. If you would like to address council on this item, you may do so now.
Pass.
Thank you very much. The next caller is 963. If you would like to address council on this item, you may do so now.
Pass.
Thank you. And again, this is caller 398. You may address council now. Three, 9, 8. Okay, thank you, Mayor. Those are all the callers.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5.1, the first item on the business agenda, which is
Mayor Byer.
Oh, sorry.
I did have a comment about the last one. I just didn't have a question for staff.
You
My
got to
bad.
wave. Sorry.
My
Go
bad.
ahead.
So I just want to be clear. So when would this assessment take place? This is like, when would this assessment be done towards businesses?
So the assessment is collected as part of the summer taxes. The current recommendation before you is only for a 1-year special assessment because the Downtown Management Board felt it was imperative to kind of consider it for 1 year and see where we are at. Historically, the City Council has approved up to 2 years or 5-year assessments, but they thought that 1 year was appropriate. So the current assessment is scheduled to expire on June 30th. This assessment, if approved, would begin July 1, 2020 and be in effect through June 30th, 2021.
Just comment, I serve on the Downtown Management Board, so I was part of this discussion. If anybody wants kind of a flavor of that discussion. It was briefly floated actually by me, the idea of lowering that assessment just for this year.
Yeah.
Previous to COVID, we were actually planning to increase it because it is a very modest sum that has not been increased for, as Amy said, since the DMB was founded. I was fairly convinced by some of the other DMB members that it is a very small amount of money. This is, like tens of dollars per year, not thousands of dollars per year.
Okay.
And the primary thing that we use it for is marketing. It supports some of the staff hours. It pays our 2 interns. But really what the DMB uses that money for is marketing. And in this time post-COVID, we are going to need every little bit of extra help that we can promoting downtown. And so it was kind of generally agreed by that body that leaving it at its previous amount, which has not been particularly odious, definitely not increasing it, but only forwarding it for 1 year with the option of possibly increasing it if things are rosier on the other side of this. Of course, maybe not if they're not rosier on the other side of this. So it's not, any money being charged to businesses right now is pretty suspect in any place that we can cut those costs. But in this case, I do actually think that it's a fairly legitimate argument to go with it as it has stood.
And I, by the way, I do really appreciate those comments, and it is kind of a question of the DMB is going to be doing a lot of work to help out these businesses and partnering with the city on this. So this is, a debate forward or back, but I just kind of wanted a little bit more info. Obviously we're not voting on this now, but thank you for that.
Yep.
Anybody else? Okay, on to item 5.1, to set a public hearing for May 26, 2020 for the consideration of a resolution establishing a police community relations review committee. I put this on the business agenda rather than on the consent agenda. But as I said earlier, just to bring it to the fore for the public to see and make comment, which I appreciate the comments we got. And I was also hoping, even though we're not voting on this tonight, to get any amendments that people have already, if they have them in mind now, so that on the 26th, we will have a different version of this if it's amended tonight, which will be closer to the final version, so that people can have it for a couple of weeks before we talk about it. But I'm not quite sure how to do that, Mr. Yaden, since it's not on the floor to be approved. How do we actually amend it?
You can introduce it and then amend it after its introduction to however you want to have it set for the next.
Okay, so I would like to introduce this resolution.
A second.
Okay, so are there any amendments?
Did Tom? Oh, never mind. I thought he was raising his hand.
I think he's just unmuting.
My bad.
And sorry, before you go, Councilmember Stevens, I think we've talked about this a lot already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time saying what it is, but just to make sure everybody is clear, this is not us setting up an independent police review commission. This is us laying out who should be on the committee by affiliation, not by name, to spend 6 months or more if needed to recommend to us how to create an independent citizens review commission for the police. So that's what we're trying to do. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. And yeah,
Can I
I'm
ask
sorry
a
about
question
that.
first?
Oh,
Yes, sorry,
absolutely.
Mr. Meadows.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question to Tom because you made a motion to introduce, but we're setting a public hearing tonight. So is it's sufficient to have a motion to set a public hearing and then make amendments to the document? Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so is that your motion? Is that what my question is? To
Yes,
set
that's
a
my
public
motion.
hearing?
That's my motion. Is that your second, Mr. Stevens?
So the second that I'm making is then on setting the public hearing, not the introduction of the resolution.
It would be both.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the motion, Mr. Meadows, to set the public
Got it.
hearing. Okay. And introduce the resolution.
Awesome.
So, but if anybody has discussion before amendments, that's fine. But I know that Mr. Stevens has some amendments. Okay.
I'm happy to, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I will make a motion to amend in the numbered section of the resolution involving the members that are comprised. I will amend item number 7 to read: one member of the city council to serve as liaison to the committee, dash, this shall be a non-voting member, in similar fashion to how number 8 is worded. I'll
And
look for a second. Yeah,
could you say that one more time? I'm sorry, Mr.
absolutely.
Stevens.
Absolutely. So changing number 7, which currently reads the mayor, comma, who shall chair the committee, to one member of the city council to serve as a liaison to the committee, dash, this shall be a non-voting member, period.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Miss Gregg. Hang on. All right, any discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Babcock? I see you waving over there.
The hand keeps going the wrong direction on mirror image. Thank you. I don't like this because just generally I don't like non-voting members on committees. I just think either you're on or you're not, and either you have the full power of being on the committee or you don't. It's not so much a mayor city council thing as I just don't care for the creation of another non-voting member. And spoiler alert, I'm probably going to make an amendment to strike the other non-voting member. Thank you.
Councilmember Gregg, I got you, Mr. Stevens and
Thank you.
Mr. Meadows.
Well, I don't have a point about this. I have other things, so we'll come with it.
Councilmember Meadows?
Yeah, I would be, I guess, supportive of the idea of not necessarily having the mayor, although I think that in the long run, it's better to have the mayor as the chair of this committee. I agree with Councilmember Babcock that I'm not really keen on non-voting members on committees. I'm not sure what the point is there. And, but I think that this is like one of the most important things that the council will be proposing. I know that everything we do is important in some respect, but we are dealing with an issue that has developed with our police department, which has undermined the public trust in the police department. And I think it's important for a member of this council to lead that effort. And that is why I think that is appropriate for the mayor, should she choose to do this. That the mayor should be the leader of this committee that can do investigation, and to the extent that we do not get cooperation within the community or within our organization, the city, that can use the subpoena power that the charter provides to the city council, really. And so I'm not in favor of any change to this as it sits. I think it's important for the leader of this council to be the leader of this effort.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. To Councilmember Babcock's comment, really the intention behind this is just to form it similar to how, you know, our commissions are structured currently, to have a resource there, to have an advocate there. But at this point, we're not voting members of any of the commissions that we liaison. And I think that's important because we do have the final say. We're going to have the final say here with whatever the recommendations are. And it's important that somebody's in the know and can provide some insight on the council perspective. But I think that having the mayor, and this is not saying the mayor specifically, but having any member of council as the chair of the committee, I think will, even inadvertently, with absolutely no bad intention, might sway the conversation away from what the community wants. And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for the best case scenario. We're looking for experts. And if we really do believe that, then I don't want us putting ourselves in the situation of steering the conversation in a direction that might not be beneficial. So that's the reason why I made the amendment.
Councilmember Babcock.
But this isn't like other committees. I mean, this is a committee to form a committee. And again, my problem with the amendment isn't whether it's the mayor or a member of council or even chairing. It's just the voting member versus non-voting member. There you have it.
Okay, any other comments? At this point, I would like to ask the clerk to call the roll on the amendment. And the amendment would be to replace the mayor, who shall chair the committee, with one member of the city council to serve as liaison to the committee. This shall be a non-voting member. Ms. Clerk.
Councilmember Babcock?
No.
Councilmember Gregg?
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens?
Yes.
Mayor Byer?
No. Do you have another amendment, Mr. Stevens?
I do. This is in relation to what I believe is somewhat of a discrepancy. In the section above what the membership is, it says comprised of 11 members appointed by the mayor as follows. And then later in the resolution, it identifies the mayor with approval from the city council as putting those people on the committee. I would like to amend the section right before the members to read Now therefore be it resolved, the City Council of the City of East Lansing hereby establishes a Police Community Relations Review Committee comprised of 11 members appointed by the mayor, subject to approval by the City Council as follows, :
I will second that for purposes of discussion. Mr. Stevens, will you point out where that second part was?
Yes, let me pull it up really quick.
It's in the first, it is further resolved after the list of committee members.
Okay,
Thank you.
hang on. Okay, would you like to discuss that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that it's very, very important that there's a layer of that we, when we approve people to committees like this, that we do have a city council approval. We're a council of equals, and this is a very important issue, I hope, to all of us. And so having one person have the ability to appoint folks and just having that sole person have that ability is not something I'm comfortable with. I'm much more comfortable with the idea of mayor subject to the approval of city council, which is generally how we do most commissions for those liaisons. So,
Mr. Meadows.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the motion. I just note that it looked to me like this second language, the mayor, subject to the approval of the city council, shall appoint East Lansing residents to fill those positions. That's reads to me that if for some reason we don't get appointments to the commission from these targeted groups that, like the Human Relations Commission or the others, you have the ability to fill those positions with other East Lansing residents. And so I thought that it only applied to that, but I don't have a particular problem with the motion. I just think there was a very specific authority in that second reference to it.
Right. And to be honest, I think that this was just an oversight, Mr. Stevens. I
do not think it is anything.
I think it originally did say subject to the approval, and I don't know how it got out. And if we were going to take it out, I probably would have taken it out of both of them. So I will support your amendment.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll on this one?
Councilmember Babcock?
Yes.
Councilmember Gregg?
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens?
Yes.
And Mayor Byer?
Yes. Mr. Stevens, did you have another amendment?
I do at this point. We did hear concerns from folks about number 5 on the makeup. And I would like to, for the purpose of discussion, as there was several public comment that indicated that having a member of the law enforcement community on the commission, and not just as a resource that could be available, but just as a standing member, voting member, was something that the community was uncomfortable with. So I'll make an amendment to strike a number 5 from that makeup. That is the one that refers to one member affiliated with the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. And sorry, I'll wait for.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Gregg. Would you like to speak to your amendment, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, the chair of the HRC reached out to me regarding this, and a few other members that have been fairly active in the community on this issue have reached out to me as well. And it just with a concern that the same thing from our original debate back a while ago now was the constant concern over should we have somebody from the law enforcement community on as a voting member or should we not? And time and time again, community members told us that they did not want to see that. So that's why I'm making this amendment. I will say that for the purpose of organization in this committee and having the numbers line up, I would also suggest the original resolutions after that had 2 members from the Human Relations Commission, and that's where I would put that extra member. But I can make that an amendment after if this passes. So
thank you. Councilmember Gregg, and then Councilmember Meadows and Councilmember Babcock.
So I think the purpose in that, that member was to have somebody in the room that had familiarity with law enforcement standards, which I think there are members of the community that have that expertise that are not associated with law enforcement as a uniformed officer. I think
Yeah.
one of the commenters mentioned staff from MSU, professors in the
You froze, Jesse. You froze.
Oh dear.
Jesse?
I'll send her a text. Let's go on to Councilmember Meadows while I let Jesse know she's frozen in space.
Okay, the language here says one member affiliated with the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. That's the group of individuals. There is a commission that is actually comprised of, a county sheriff, a police chief, a number of people, lawyers, ordinary individuals who deal with police activity at certain times. But the Commission on Law Enforcement Standards is really an administrative group set up in the Department of State Police that is comprised of public employees, not necessarily active duty police individuals, who set standards for police activity, which is exactly what we're trying to do in the second part of this, to set the standards for police activity within the city of East Lansing. So I think there's a misunderstanding of what this is. If we were going to change this, I would suggest that we just say non-active duty police individual member affiliated with the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. There's administrative hearing officers there. There's all kinds of individuals who are employed within that agency to set the standards for activity, which is exactly what we're going to be dealing with here. So I think it's actually a great resource, and having it as a voting member would be a positive thing for this group.
Councilmember Gregg, sorry you got frozen out. Are you hooked back up? Can you hear us?
I don't know whether that was a.
All right.
I think so. Okay. So we quit hearing you early on, so maybe you should just start over.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, this is me running my computer Wi-Fi off of my cell phone hotspot, and then my cell phone ran out of battery. So
that'll do it.
Because my house has crappy internet. So sorry. Hi, everybody. I think I was most of the way through the pertinent part of my comment, just to say that the benefit of having somebody from that body was the expertise that they would bring, and that expertise could be brought by somebody who was not a law enforcement officer. And so maybe rather than adding, I certainly don't have any problem with having multiple members of the HRC as well, but we're getting to have sort of a cumbersome group. But replacing that with somebody, I don't know how to phrase this, one member with expertise in law enforcement standards.
Would you consider that a friendly amendment, Mr.
Yes,
Stevens?
I would. That's A-okay with me.
So one member with law enforcement, how did you put it, Jesse?
Well, I'm just, the Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, I'm just borrowing their language and saying one committee member with expertise in law enforcement standards.
Okay, so that is now the amendment, is to replace, what number was that?
Number 5.
Replace one member affiliated with the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards with one member with expertise in law enforcement standards. Okay, Councilmember Babcock, you had something before when it was, yeah.
In some ways, the friendly amendment addresses it. I think I'm one of the few people who has been as a professional, subjected to a committee to reform us that by statute we weren't allowed to belong to. I was a public defender, and the state law that was going to reform us incompetent morons by statute didn't allow anyone currently doing court-appointed cases to be on the committee. And they really missed out on a lot of insight. In this case, I see this as two ways. Policing is a very different kind of job. And we want to hear more about how they're trained. We also want the people who establish training standards to hear more from the community. And by having someone with an experience in law enforcement, particularly with MCOLs, because they set training standards, but anyone with a law enforcement background, I think would be an important part of this community, or excuse me, an important part of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Stevens.
So I just wanted to comment on one thing so when we originally talked about this a while back now, I as well was a person that said we should have somebody from either our own department or somebody that's in law enforcement to provide knowledge, background, information, others. And what ended up coming out of the HRC after several long meetings was somebody as a resource, not necessarily as a voting member, somebody they could call on for expertise. And the reason why I will say that, and what I really hope Councilmember Babcock you consider, is that the difference between the two issues of public defenders and policing. What we're talking about here is members of a community that are most affected by a very serious issue. And the truth is that when there's a nice face in the room that hasn't done anything wrong to you, it's difficult to express concerns, and it ends up being a hindrance to having open conversation. And the truth is, a lot of people might not feel comfortable sharing their experiences, their stories with somebody that represents what their issue stems from.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, Aaron, hang on. I think you might be confused. I think we may have made an error because you moved that we just strike number 5, right?
yes, and then we did the friendly amendment. for
Right,
the-
but that person would still be a voting member. So are you, do you really consider that a friendly amendment or not? I mean, you know
if
what I,
it is
Sorry.
somebody that has law enforcement expertise and standards, could be somebody that is a criminal justice professor at MSU. I actually was going to make the comment that maybe a specific standard of non-active duty, as I believe maybe Councilmember Meadows or somebody else made that comment before. Of course, we're not referring to officers in itself, so I don't necessarily know if that would be applicable. But I just wanted to point out the issue with that, because the comparison being made between what I think is the public defender group and this, I think, is different from perspectives.
okay, so to make it something that you would actually support, it would be a one member, I don't think this is going to be an active duty officer, because we've got one member with expertise in law enforcement
Standards.
standards, who is not, we could say, who is not an
active duty officer. That's fine by me.
Okay, active duty officer. Okay. So now, rather than strike number 5, the amendment would be one member with expertise in law enforcement standards who is not an active duty police officer. All right. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Meadows.
question.
And then
Yeah,
Babcock.
just a question. I just want to point out that under that language, this could be an appointee who is affiliated with the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards.
I understand
since
that.
Many of them live in our community. Is that correct?
Yes.
You wouldn't have a problem with that, right? Okay.
No, but I think the direction would be, since this person is going to be picked by the mayor and then approved by the council, that the mayor will be looking to calls if we go that direction for somebody who's not an officer, but who is an expert anyway.
Right.
Or who was never an officer. Yes. Okay, Councilmember Babcock?
And this would be a voting member or this be a non-voting?
No,
member?
it's still a voting member.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll on the amendment?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Gregg,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Yes.
and Mayor Byer.
Yes. Before we go on to any more amendments, just a question about procedure. Mr. Lahanis, is somebody keeping track of these amendments or is that my job?
Nicole Fraser.
Nicole, thank you. Thank you for coming back on and saving me from that, having to read my handwriting. Okay, Mr. Stevens, do you have any other amendments?
You know, I did have one written out on the concern from a couple of community members on broadness in the bottom of page 3, but I'll talk about that at the end if some other people have other amendments.
Or another option, Mr. Stevens, is we have another chance to amend this again when we do it on the 26th.
Yeah, I understand that. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes because I've been amending for a bit. So
That's all right. That's efficient. Any other amendments before we go back to Mr. Stevens? Councilmember Gregg.
I find the first whereas clause, the city council of East Lansing has determined to comprehensively examine the relationship between the police and the East Lansing community. I find that to be vague, vague to the point of obfuscation. I feel like we should take the first step in this process in the spirit that we plan to continue in this process. And I think to me, that means really being very open and honest about what our problem is that we're trying to solve. I think the truth is that there are a lot of community members that do not have a troubled relationship with our police department. And those would be the Caucasian members of our community, and that we have heard the experience of many Black and brown residents that says that they do not have that same positive relationship with our police force. That is the problem that we are trying to address. And I think we need to use very clear language in this, which is our first step on that path, to be completely honest with ourselves about what we're trying to do. So I would like to see that changed to really acknowledge the fact that there are residents in our community that live a very different experience than I do, and that many people in our community live. So I don't have a great way to say that.
I kept waiting for the language.
Yeah, no, my week has been sort of crazy. I have not had a quiet moment to sit and really contemplate how I want to say that. I will probably come back to our public hearing with something more elegant unless somebody has something to suggest. But anyway, I want us to really approach this in the spirit of humility. I need us to, I personally plan to really confront the fact that I'm a member of a body that has power over our residents, and that some of those residents are not experiencing our community the way that I do. So I'd like this to clearly state that.
Councilmember Meadows.
Yeah, I'll just say I'll volunteer to work with Councilmember Gregg on a change to that language so that we can be more directly addressing some of the problems that we have seen in the community.
Good. And I will support that when you have some pretty language.
Okay, thanks.
That'll be at that next meeting thing.
Apologies to everyone that I don't have that prepared. This has been my first week back at work, and it's just been absolutely crazy. So I haven't had the peace of mind to really put the effort that I wanted to into that. So
you've got some time. Councilmember Babcock, did you have something? I couldn't tell. You picked up your pen, and I didn't know if you were talking to me.
I'll pass for the time being. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, I just have one more amendment at this point, and I just want to say before I read this amendment off, I think that we all understand the intention behind this commission is to give us a recommendation on an independent police oversight commission, and Based on what the mayor had written here, that was my understanding. I understand that some folks in the community view the mission statement as too broad and having too much to go off of. So I tried to draft something that keeps the majority of what's there, but hones it in a little bit more. But I don't believe that it was intentional on the mayor's part to overdraft and push off policies and procedures to this commission. So this is an amendment, bottom of page 3. It is further resolved, and I would like this paragraph to now read what I'm going to say. So it is further resolved, the mission of the committee shall be to take testimony and review evidence relating to the relationship between the East Lansing Police Department, the Michigan State University Police Department, and members of the East Lansing community, research best practices in other cities for police oversight commissions, and report to the City Council on policies and procedures which will aid in the creation of an oversight commission and a proposed structure and operating procedure for the Independent Police Oversight Commission. It is a little bit wordy, but I think it accomplishes the goal of honing it in while also.
Can you repeat the last part again?
And a proposed structure and operating procedure for the Independent Police Oversight Commission.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Meadows. Councilmember Stevens, I think you made your point. And we heard from the community. Just, I guess not in defense, but just explanation. I was going back and forth between having this committee do that or having the actual commission do that. But then the commission I thought would be pretty busy doing commission-like things. And I think it's just a waste of a lot of good minds getting together to not also ask for any other ideas they have to move us where we need to go. But if that's not what the community wants, then I'll have to think about that. Councilmember Meadows, did you have something to say?
Only this, that I think we still can accomplish with this language, the idea that where this committee, through its investigation and the testimony it hears, sees problems in actual procedure within the police department, it can bring that to the attention of the council in its report so that that can result in the ultimate committee, the ultimate commission, having that as a focus as it goes forward. So I'm okay with the language because I don't think it really restricts necessarily completely what we had originally thought this would do.
Okay, any questions or comments for Councilmember Stevens?
Question on Mark's. You're okay with the language as written, or you're okay with Aaron's amendment?
I'm okay with both. I don't think that the amendment necessarily stops the commission that we're creating tonight or in 2 weeks from when it comes across a process or procedure within the police department, which is causing the type of pain that we're trying to stop, that it can't be in the report so that it can become a focus of the next commission.
And since the mayor,
I would hope that if things arose that were that clearly evident, that we would hear about them before there was a report, that we would hear about them instantaneously.
and that's one of the good things about having the mayor on the committee, because that's exactly what will happen regardless of what this resolution says. So I'll be supporting your resolution, Aaron, just because sorry, your amendment, because everybody that's spoken about this has said that. I will say that when I discussed this with community members that were interested and have been working on this for years, they had no problem with having a broader charge. But now that I think about it, we did put a shorter timeline on it after we had that first discussion, so maybe people just didn't think that all the way through. So anyway, I'll support that amendment to narrow down the focus. Any other comments? All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Gregg,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Byer.
Yes. Okay, are there any other amendments? Seeing none, this will, oh no, we need to,
Vote on the motion itself, which is to
Motion.
set the public
right.
hearing.
We need to vote on the motion, which is to set a preliminary, or to set a, where am I? To set a public hearing for May 26th for the consideration of this resolution establishing a police community relations review committee as amended. Any more discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Gregg,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Byer.
Yes. I have a question before, oh, sorry, the item is approved. I have a question before we go to 5.2. Will this be a long item, Mr. Lahanas? You're muted, Mr. Lahanas.
It will be brief.
Okay.
So we could probably get through it quick and then go to the break.
Okay, so 5.2, to set a public hearing for May 26, 2020 regarding the allocation of CDBG CV funds as a substantial amendment to the program year 2019 action plan. I believe this is Ms. Schussler-Smith.
Yeah, I just want to say, Your Honor, if I could, that this is just setting a public hearing, but we are looking for just if there's any brief direction council wants to give on this item. We sort of talked around a little bit relating to some changes that we found out about adding money to this housing, sort of emergency housing fund. So that really is why it's a business item and not just a consent agenda item.
Right.
So just looking for some immediate feedback from council, but it really is just setting a public hearing. So Ms. Schmidt, go ahead.
Thank you. So in March, Congress approved the CARES Act that we're all familiar with, which provides East Lansing the opportunity to receive an additional $289,484 in community development block grant funds. The funds must be used to prevent, prepare, and respond to the coronavirus outbreak. And I know in your packet materials, there was a general guidance / FAQ sheet for your consideration. At this time, staff is recommending that council consider two project areas for funding. The first is a housing relief program, possibly in the total amount of $121,820. The second, as a business support item, in the total amount of $167,664. However, other areas of funding could be considered. While council has been asked to simply set a public hearing at this time, Mr. Lahanas mentioned that it would be very helpful if you could provide any guidance if there are different types of program areas that you would like to see funded for consideration. Depending on the recommendations, it is very likely that staff will then present a CDBG CV budget, a revised program year 2019 action plan. So that again falls between July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. 2015 to 2020 consolidated plan document that would be amended, and a citizen participation plan. That is per the guidance and requirements of HUD. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and obviously appreciate any feedback.
I did have one question, Amy. The business support grant, is that is the same pool of money that we were talking about earlier? Or this is a different?
Right, so there are two pots of money. There's the
Right.
community development block grant CV funds. That's what we're currently discussing. This is the money that came in through Congress in March. So that's pot number one. Pot number two is our entitlement funds that we receive every year. What staff's recommendation now is that since we've learned that the CV funds can be used to support businesses in this time, what we're considering is having two waves of funding to kind of determine need. So the first wave could be CV funds that could be accessible by the end of July or sometime in July. And then the second wave would be part of our entitlement that we're going to talk again about later tonight. That could be eligible probably in August.
Okay, so it's two separate.
Two different pots of money. Yes, this is specific to coronavirus response. So if there were other types of activities, for example, diagnostic testing, or, if we needed to set up emergency hospitals or things of that nature, this is why the federal government has kind of allocated these funds to help support in whatever need council feels is necessary.
And we currently don't see anything in East Lansing that would be medical like that. We're really talking about the fallout to our residents and our business residents.
I think I'll defer that to Mr. Lahanas, but I have not personally received any requests.
Certainly the city is not, we're pre-hospital with EMS, but we're not in the providing of medical business. So that's why we thought that obviously the business relief and the direct assistance to people in terms of housing were two very appropriate uses to help our residents.
Okay.
So are there any other questions for staff? Councilmember Meadows.
Yeah, I just want, in terms of how this is going to operate, we aren't creating within city government an oversight or other type of organization to actually implement these programs. Is that correct, or we are? I don't see that information here. And then a second question, probably mostly for Amy. It's pretty clear that the information that we received says that we can't duplicate. In other words, if somebody has already received an amount of money through some other agency of the federal or state government to deal with coronavirus relief of some kind, we can't give them, we have to take that amount of money and deduct it from the money that we would be providing them. How are we going to administer that?
So I believe to your first question, in terms of oversight, the current recommendation is that the programs would be that the emergency relief program would be considered to be managed by Capital Area Housing Partnership. So that would be, HUD considers that a third party that would be managing that project with the oversight of myself and other community development staff. So obviously under Tom Fehrenbach. To the second program, the discussion is that program would be entirely managed by city staff, and that the application and vetting purposes would be first come, first serve, obviously through the guidance of HUD regulations and our city attorney's office. So everything would remain in-house for that application process. And I think to the question of duplication of services, my understanding from the guidance of HUD is that whatever programs you determine, it is their strong recommendation that you consult with and work with other municipalities that have also received, CARES funding. So, whether that be FEMA or, for example, Ingham County or other organizations, that they don't want to see duplication, as the council member had mentioned. So what they're kind of suggesting is that whatever is determined, that we prove to them, right, that there is a need, if that makes sense. So that's the other reason that these two programs have been recommended, because we are currently not aware of any emergency housing relief program. I know that there are some other mid-Michigan cities that are considering it, nor do we currently obviously manage a business relief program.
So we're not receiving any FEMA funds coming into the city at this point in time that benefit, say, low-income individuals who would qualify for our housing assistance program that you're aware of anyway.
That's correct. We as the city are not receiving any funds.
Okay. And then the memo that you provided us indicated that to the extent that would be available, we would deduct that amount of money from whatever we were providing to an individual. And if CAHP is managing this, they will be able to do that, to analyze that in terms of any other funds that might have come to this individual. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. The individual would fill out an application, and we believe there's been some discussion, but essentially provide bank account records, right, as part of the application process. And so that would show individual, any sort of income that has been received.
And then this is sort of a non-related, I guess, in one respect, but one of the callers earlier said that we should begin to audit our activity, the city's activity with regard to these. I was under the impression that we are regularly audited by the federal government as to how we manage these programs. Am I misinformed on that?
No, that's correct. On an annual basis, we at the City of East Lansing submit a CAPER document. It's consolidated annual performance evaluation report. That is sent into HUD showing any and all activities for every program year, and they monitor that. HUD then reserves the right to monitor us at any time. I believe our last audit was 2 years ago. They often do come to the city at any threshold. We've done monitorings virtually. We've done monitoring visits in-house. In terms of how we self-monitor, so any third-party organization, so for example, Capital Area Housing Partnership, they've been a recipient of ours for years. As part of our HUD regulations, we do go out and monitor them on an annual basis. So all third-party recipients that receive money from us that are CDBG funded, we monitor them, and then HUD monitors us. So it's essentially a two-step monitoring process. We keep the necessary documentation that HUD then reviews every time that they feel it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much for that information.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Just because I didn't do the math, approximately how many of these housing assistant grants would we be able to fund with that money?
Well, you know, there's been at the current baseline, you know, if you were to consider approximately $1,000 a month or so per recipient, I too, I apologize, would need to do the math, but I believe it would be nearly 100 households is what we assume.
And that's both rental or mortgage assistance?
Correct. That would provide both rental and mortgage assistance. And the thought process is that those individuals would apply for and receive 1 month's rent, and they have the ability to apply for an additional 2 months rent, but it's our recommendation that if they go for a second or third month's rent, that they undergo a housing counseling workshop, if you will, where they could do some one-on-one. And the intent of that is that they would hopefully, you know, just be provided with some more financial stability. We understand in several cases, this is a unique situation. But as CAHP is a HUD certified counselor, we thought that that just might be additionally beneficial.
Okay.
Councilmember Stevens and then Councilmember Meadows.
So maybe from what I understood from the previous person that called in was more just kind of us monitoring this program, not necessarily HUD, but the folks that are implementing. So like, I mean, oversight is our council. Is there ways that we can, and by the way, I do very much appreciate the willingness and ability to try and figure out how we can get this money out to folks as soon as possible. And I do very much appreciate that. This is just ways that we can make sure that this money is being used in the best way possible, just because it is a finite amount of money. So I think that was the intention behind the comment.
Councilmember Meadows. Sorry, Mark. Mark.
Mark, you're muted.
I just want to make sure that when we do vote on this, that we separate those two issues. I think I'm going to have to ask to be recused if CHP is going to handle the rental housing or the housing assistance program, then I'll be asking the council to recuse myself on that. But I don't have any problem with the business thing. But if we can have those as separate votes, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
On the 26th. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, George. Any other questions or comments? All right, I move approval of setting a public hearing for May 26, 2020 regarding the allocation of the CDBG-CP funds as a substantial amendment to the program year for the 2019 action plan. Will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, no, do I have a second? Did we already
Second.
do this? All right, we have another second, seconded by Councilmember Gregg. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Gregg,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Byer.
Yes. All right, it is 9:25. We will take a break until 9:35. The recording will continue. I personally am going to mute myself.
She mu-
You did
muted
successfully.
yourself a little bit too early on that one.
I told you I was gonna mute myself and I did.
There you go.
I'm gonna mute
Woman
myself
of her word. All right.
and stop my video, but I'll be back at 9:35. Okay?
Okay. All right.
3 out of 4.
I don't think Mark's gonna be able to recuse himself. Like, we can't break up the CV budget. They gotta vote on it in one swing.
How are you doing, Ruth? How are the dogs?
The dogs are hungry. They're trying to eat my cookies. I think we might still be recording though.
If anybody has a serious issue with me asking about your dogs, I will address it on a personal level.
Okay.
There we go.
We should do chair yoga during the breaks.
I found a great yoga app, by the way. I'll send it to you.
Now, see that I would have a problem with being recorded.
Yeah, yeah, that is not going to happen. That's
Nobody needs to see me try to do yoga. That's
Don't want to hurt ourselves. Oh.
my public image more than I already have tonight. It's fine.
Holy Mary.
Okay. All right, I'm just waiting until 9:35 because I said I would. Oh, this is a long minute.
All righty, let's go. Oh, sorry, got
Very
myself.
good. All right, we are back in session. Excuse me. And we are on item 5.3, consideration of the fiscal year 2021 budgets for CDBG, Capital Improvement Fund, Parks Capital Improvement Fund, and the Parks and Recreation Fund. This would be Mr. Fehrenbach. Is that why you came on?
Starting off with me, Mayor.
Right.
Did you hear? Am I on?
You're a little
Can you hear
echoey, but
me?
we can.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, so obviously we're on the second meeting on the budget. We have one more meeting next week. I just want to go over a couple of quick things. So while we're talking about CDBG, capital parks, and Parks and Recreation, we do have all of the directors on the line. So if there's questions about any of the budget items after we finish the presentations, we'd be happy to try to take those now. Of course, you can continue to write your questions via email and we'll answer them during the week. But we thought it would be useful, being we had a little bit of we've actually lost one meeting with this, to make sure that we had people available if you have questions. So they're all available if you have questions about other parts of the budget. As we go into the, we also want to mention that we have our question and answer from the prior week as a part of the packet. So all those questions are there. Certainly, if you have any more questions about those, please feel free to ask. You know, as we go through CDBG and capital, particularly Capital Improvement Fund and Capital Improvement Fund Parks, you know, I'm sort of struck by a conversation that we had yesterday. Finance Director Felposh and I were on with the State Budget Director, Kolb, and he was talking about sort of what a financial, I guess challenge is much too small a word, what a financial impact this is going to have in terms of the state's budget, and of course how that's going to trickle down and likely impact us. So some of the numbers he was talking about were up to $6 to $7 billion of reduction in revenue, in state revenue, between this fiscal year that we're in and next fiscal year. And if you think about that in terms of the state's budget of about a general fund of about 10 billion or a little over 10 billion, you can really see the enormity of the challenge that the state is going to face. So to think that that's not going to impact us in terms of state shared revenue in other ways, I think would be overly optimistic, and I'm not that optimistic. So I think that we're going to be sharing quite a bit of the burden that is going to come down from the state's loss of revenue, and that's going to come starting this fiscal year and certainly into next fiscal year. So last time when we presented the budget and started, I said it's kind of a wait and see budget. We have to wait and see what revenues look like and wait and see on expenditures. And I think that when we go into the capital projects, that's a particularly important message, because when there are areas that we can hold on, and where we can say, let's wait till later in the year to see how the year develops, and we have discretion in that, I think we want to do that. And we certainly want to do that in areas where we can say, let's put this off till next year, if at all possible. I know that this is sort of a little bit of lets the wind out of our sails, because we got into a position now where we could finally begin to fund capital a little bit better. So to be in that situation and then have it sort of pulled back is disappointing for us. But certainly, of course, the overall financial performance of the city is of the utmost importance. So I think we have to wait and see what the revenues develop as over the coming weeks and months, how that looks, and then figure out what we would want to pull back on. So as we present this, let's keep in mind that the new COVID situation is going to have an impact on that. How exactly we would like to be able to take more time and figure out what we could hold on. Areas where we're getting grant money, where we're getting money from Natural Resources Trust or from the county trails millage, for those sorts of areas, we would not want to hold. Obviously, those projects, we want to move those projects forward. But in areas where it's pure general fund, where they're building improvements and things that we can wait on, we certainly want to look at that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fehrenbach and Ms. Schuessler to start us off, and then we'll go to Mr. McCaffrey with Parks. Tom?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lahadas. I think it's probably easiest to just start in the order of appearance on the agenda item today. So I'll kick it over to Amy to kind of wrap up the conversation regarding the fiscal year 21 CDBG budget.
Thank you. So before you this evening is information regarding the recommended fiscal year 21 Community Development Block Grant budget. The City of East Lansing is designated as an entitlement community per the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and that means that we are guaranteed annual funds as of this time. Funds are used to provide resources to primarily income eligible persons throughout our community. HUD states that for every project or activity that we fund, we must be meeting a national objective, and we report to the Department of Housing and Urban Development as such. So there are 3 areas. Number 1, that the project benefits a low to moderate income person. Number 2, that it would prevent or eliminate slum or blight. Or number 3, that it is meeting a community development need that has urgency. So it must meet one of those 3 criteria. In terms of the budget proposal before you, we are expected to receive $492,100 in funds, and those funds can be spent in 3 areas: public service, public infrastructure, and administration. Primarily in the past, we have allocated the majority of our funds to public infrastructure and administration based upon City Council's requests. This is a map. I know that during the last City Council discussion, there was a question regarding the public infrastructure eligible areas. You will see that the areas are shaded in green. I did just want to point out that these eligible areas are determined by HUD. We at the city level have no administrative purview over that selection. They are based upon census tract data information. So the current information is based upon 2010 data. The next round will then be in place for the 2020 census data information that we are working on and collecting.
Thank you for providing that.
You're welcome. Before you is the most updated graph regarding income eligibility requirements. This is also set by HUD. And so HUD works on something called an area median index, again, sort of based upon census information. So for example, a family of 4 could receive HUD assistance in whatever projects and activities that we fund. That is really based upon individual funding. So for example, a family of 4 might apply to receive down payment assistance for the purchase of a home or rehabilitation of a home where there are already residents in East Lansing. Anyone over the age of 18 is income qualified that living in that residence, and then they can make up to $64,150 and be eligible to partake in programming. So this is the proposed CDBG budget at this time. You will note that there is $80,000 budgeted towards housing projects. This primarily supports our home ownership assistance program, so our down payment assistance program that the city has actually had in place for 26 years. Our homeowner rehabilitation program, where income eligible residents that have resided in East Lansing can apply to receive funding for weather improvements, new roofs, windows, installation, things of that nature. There is a proposal we've discussed this evening regarding a business support emergency relief program that could be funded. There is administration, and then there is repayment of the Section 108 loan payment. And I am pleased to share that if City Council determines to fund it at this level, That Section 108 loan will then be paid in full. We have worked very hard the past 2 fiscal years to make additional payments towards that loan. It was a 20-year commitment. We have made additional payments. And so if that were to be paid off at this level, our CDBG commitment for entitlement funds would be complete. And I'm happy to answer any questions City Council might have.
Any questions for staff? I, for one, will not be sad to see the back of the CDBG fund for the Avondale. Mr. Meadows.
Just a quick question on housing rehab. Does that include rental housing? Can we use those funds to improve rental housing as well as homeowner, owner occupied properties?
So we have not historically done that. My understanding is that that would be an eligible expense if that is something that City Council would like for me to look into more fully. I am happy to research that. Historically, though, we have only provided it towards homeowners, family residences.
Interesting. Any other questions? Okay, what's up next?
So next would be the capital improvement program, which we shared with you on April 30th at your last meeting. And as I mentioned there, that CIP is required by state law to be updated annually. It's intended, of course, to provide a general order of priority for city acquisition or construction projects planned over the next 6 years, and is generally thought of as a best practice. We work across departments. The planning department works to pull this document together, and it identifies the needs and the funding sources. Tonight, we'll be diving mainly into the Parks and Recreations aspects of the CIP, with subsequent conversations at your meeting next week. Ultimately, we'll be looking for approval as a separate item on your May 26th budget meeting. The plan itself, details are outlined here, showing you, I think, page 55 of the agenda item, where we break down the appendix. It's a very big, long spreadsheet. And as you can see, it's organized by asset and then by category of need. Expenditures are shown on the left side, with the 2020 proposed budget being the first column. And then on the right side, you will see the funding sources. And they're planned as shown for the annual budget up to 2026. Actual expenditures are approved on an annual basis as part of the budget process. So this document doesn't really approve the expenditures. It's really just approving the plan, and then those expenditures are part of the annual budget process every year. If you scroll down to page 64 of your packet here, you can see that we include every year a schedule of bonded indebtedness. This gives an overall picture of the city bonds and the enterprise fund financing. A couple more pages. So this is a pretty comprehensive document here, showing all the indebtedness. And then the next page, 65, is specific to the Avondale Square project. And as Ms. Schlesler-Schmidt mentioned, you can see that on the right-hand side there, the Section 108 loan, if the council approves the CDBG funding, would be paid off at the end of fiscal year 2021. And you can also see on the left-hand side that the city will need to continue to subsidize the city bond issuance until fiscal year 2035, when it's defeased. One note, we've recently talked with our bond counsel and our financial advisor, and actually will be eligible to potentially refund that bond, not in fiscal year 2020 as it shows here, but actually in January. So it'd be technically fiscal year 2021. We're working with them to monitor the situation and fully analyze the options in advance of that time, and look for any potential savings that the council may wish to consider at a later date.
So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, or if not, we can pass it over to Tim McCaffrey to kind of walk you through the Parks and Recs items tonight.
I could just quickly note, Mayor and Council, that if you have the physical budget book, it might be easier to look at that because it's so small on the screens. This is the back pages of the large fold-out sections. It's the very, very back section of pages in the fold-out is where you'll find what just Mr. Fehrenbach went over. So it's easier to look at that perhaps at your leisure than going through the packet. So anyway, just point that out for you. Thanks, Tom.
Any questions for Mr. Fehrenbach? All right, what's next?
Mr. McCaffrey.
So yep.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. I trust you can hear me at this point.
We can. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, so Nicole, will you be putting up the slide for me? There you go. We were going to do the capital improvements. There you go. These are, Mr. Fehrenbach explained about parks projects, but before we get into parks projects, we have a couple of different capital funds, capital improvement funds, and this is capital improvement funds for facilities. So the projects that we've identified in the capital improvement fund and facilities for fiscal year 2021 are the following. City Hall fire alarm system upgrade to meet code in with respect to our fire alarm system. Replace the jail heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and exhaust at the City Hall. Engineering to replace the City Hall building automation system, and engineering to replace the boiler at the Hannah Community Center. Hannah Theater improvements. This would be replacing stage lighting to be LED lighting. This particular project is identified as using about $25,000 from income tax and Michigan Council of the Arts and Cultural Affairs grant in the amount of $15,000 to get to the $40,000 number. Roof area I resurfacing at the Hannah Community Center, and this is a section of roof area I to replace the EPDM roof that we're having some problems with, and engineering to replace the Hannah Building Center, Hannah Center building automation system. The interior renovations identified for fire station number 1 is architectural renovations, if you will. The building was built in the late 1960s or early 1970s. I'm not sure I remember exactly the date. And there's been no upgrades as far as the building renovation, as the interior renovations, where our firefighters live in that space, if you will, during multiple hours a day, because they have their unusual schedules as far as the firefighters are concerned. And then replacing entry doors and side lights at the Orchard Street Pump House. We are doing a roof replacement and soffit repair project this year at the Orchard Street Pump House. Aside from the Hannah Theater improvements, which I've already suggested, we're proposing income tax funds and Council of the Arts and Cultural Affairs grant if it's received. All the rest of these projects are identified at this time in the city's general fund. And of course, we will be looking as close as possible to how we move forward with these projects, given the financial situation that's anticipated associated with the COVID-19 outbreak. There's one more project that we're looking at for fiscal year 2021, and that is the Hannah Community Center parking lots and a curb cut for improving accessibility opportunities. This is a $246,800 project, and the funding sources identified here are primetime seniors are prepared to make a $50,000 contribution towards the project. We're proposing $150,000 out of the city's general fund, The garage fund is suggesting that 36,725 would come into that, largely because the DPW crews oftentimes use their large trucks on the entry drive to get into the community center. And then a small amount coming out of the community development block grant carryover. So with respect to facilities and infrastructure for fiscal year 2021, this is the budget we put together pre-COVID-19. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from staff or from council for staff? Council member Babcock.
Hi, I would just like to say that this started because, I am so sorry. This started because I had heard from the senior center, that seniors were having a really hard time with the mobility due to where the curb cuts are in front of that building and the doors that have to be shut for security purposes. So as we get older, we get a little less elastic, or our vision isn't as good. Tumbling off curbs becomes a real threat. And Kelly Arndt one day encountered a senior citizen who was really struggling to make it down that curb step. And that put in motion, and staff has come along to really make some improvements that, while necessary in pavement, will make a huge, huge payoff in quality of life, particularly for the prime time program. So thank you.
Oh, you're muted, Ruth.
Mr. Stevens.
Sorry, thank you. So these were estimations based on pre-COVID, and some of those items that you listed are obviously huge priorities, but based on that allocation from the general fund and others, I mean, do you imagine that we're going to see an amendment at some point on this, just depending on how much of a hit we take, or is this something that we're 100% committed to going forward with?
So if your question is on all of the items, I think that's where we want to wait. So on items like the Hannah entry, which is an area which is really a storefront for our customers, which, if the parking lot gets too bad in terms of its degradation, then you could have people potentially create an unsafe situation. I think an area like that, we really want to push forward. When you get to some of the other areas of mechanical systems and buildings, renovations to buildings that we can wait on, those would be areas that we would like to push those back if we can to later in the year at the least, because obviously it's a long the fiscal year is a year, so we don't have to do those right now in July. We can put hold on some of those projects, the building improvements, and just try to wait and get a sense of what the year looks like, and then decide if we need to pull back on some of those at that point.
Sure. This is a follow-up. And by the way, I don't want to question the legitimacy of any of these projects. I think reading through them, obviously, many, if not all, are very necessary for citizens, for the city, for safety reasons. I recall 2 years ago when we were going over capital improvement projects and we did not have the income tax at that point. We had received somewhat of a prioritization list that was fairly easily accessible that was kind of marking out. I know that you've kind of already done that in the sense of what is absolutely necessary in that big document, but if you are intending on maybe pushing some of those projects out, if we could know what those were, what things could be delayed, what we could see as a possibility before approving this project or this fund.
Yeah. So you'd like the answers before you approve this. So you want to hear that. See, my view is I would prefer to ask council to approve it and then wait until the end of the fiscal year to see if we can delay things and not have to come through at this point and say what projects we are not going to do. I mean, all these projects are important and in all rights should be done. It's just a matter of the timing. Can we delay it within the fiscal year? If it can't wait, can we delay it beyond the fiscal year if we have to? So
I have a follow-up, but I'll let Mark go, please.
Councilmember Meadows, you're muted.
That's the way people like me. I guess I'm concerned with the approach we're taking with regard to this. It would seem to me that if Chris Kolb has already indicated that their expectation is really an astonishing $6 to $7 billion worth less in state revenues at this time, that means that the impact on the city of East Lansing in terms of revenue sharing, fire funds, everything that we have relied on other than taxes is going to be something that we can calculate at this time.
Actually,
but this budget that we're reviewing is a budget that that has an assumption of revenue which may be unrealistic at this moment. You know, we didn't anticipate when this began that COVID would not only rob us of state shared revenues, but also very likely reduce the income tax revenues that we assumed going into this budget, as well as property taxes. Possibly we'll see a reduction in value in property again, because this is an unprecedented reduction. And so I'm thinking that if it is possible for us to have an estimate of what kind of reductions we're going to have to look at, I would rather see that now rather than wait until after we pass this budget and then start to pass a series of amendments down the road. Let's try to put a budget together that is our best projection at this point in time, rather than wait until a later time. So that's just how I'm looking at it at this point. But I think there's what George has revealed tonight is really not a good picture for us going forward.
So I'll get you in a minute, Councilmember Gregg and Councilmember Stevens, but I'd like to respond to Councilmember Meadows. So first of all, the revenue estimating conference is on Friday. So anything that our lobbyist already has is knowledge that has not yet been released. So that's just their belief about what's going to be said. Second of all, the revenue estimating conference doesn't have any data yet. They've got 1 month's worth of state data. They won't really know anything about how bad things are until July or August. Third, the federal government, the House just dropped the bill today that would do a lot to help out states. It's a lot of money. We don't know exactly what will happen, of course, in the Senate. And if McConnell gets his way, we'll all go bankrupt. But in an election year, I can't believe that anybody would want to basically close the economy is what they're talking about. If they're going to make cities and states and school districts face what we're facing without any aid, then that's just economically the most irresponsible thing that the federal government could do. So I don't think that's going to happen. And then finally, the property tax piece that we have will not be affected this year or next year by COVID. It's the year after that, because the assessments for this year are already in, and then next year's assessments are not going to change. They can't change that much in 1 year. So I agree, Mark, that this is not good and it could be horrible, but I don't think we will have the data to even estimate how bad it is or what kind of bad it is until the federal government quits mucking around and we get more state data and more of our own property, our own income tax data. So what a lot of school districts are doing, and it's a lot of work for your budget people, is they're adopting 3 budgets. Basically, they adopt one, which is the middle one, but they have 3. They have the middle case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the best case scenario. And if we want to ask, I think it's not unreasonable to ask George to say, okay, let's go ahead and pass this one out as it is. But if we're going to lose, I don't know, X dollars or X percent of revenue, what would you cut first? Like Councilmember Stevens was talking, or what do we have to do no matter what? For example, I'd like to see, obviously we have to make our pension payment no matter what. We may not be able to replace the boiler in Hannah because we have to make our pension payment no matter what. That kind of thing I think is reasonable, but in the meantime, we have to pass a budget. And since we don't know anything, I think passing a budget and knowing we may well have to amend it is a reasonable way to go. Just because we don't have the data yet. Councilmember Stevens, and then I think Councilmember Gregg. I'm sorry, I got you out of order. Go ahead, Councilmember Stevens.
Councilmember Gregg, please. Go ahead.
Councilmember Gregg.
That's okay. That's fine.
Well, you kind of touched on my main concern. I absolutely agree with Mark that I would love to pass a budget that actually reflected what we have and what we can spend. But I think at this point, we have to pass some kind of budget on a timeline by charter. We can't really ask our department heads to go back and speculate just because the situation is so far out of anyone's experience that we really can. I mean, there's certain things that we know are going to be bad. What that fallout is going to be, what other things that we aren't looking at right now that might impact that. I just don't think we can get anything close to what it actually is going to be. So we're going to be doing amendments left, right, and center anyway. I think that rather than a binding document, which is what the budget usually is, this is going to be a guiding document. It's a summary of what our project heads would do, or our department heads would do if we had the money, and we can respect that for what it is, and then look back and realize that we are going to have to amend the heck out of it for the rest of the year and probably next year as well. I mean, obviously not next year's budget, that doesn't exist yet, but I mean, I think the fallout from this is going to be rolling, and we're going to have to adapt all along the way.
Yeah.
And when you think about what a budget is, it's really a limit. You don't have to spend any of those things. You really don't have to amend a budget to not spend money. So that's why we need the list, because I don't feel comfortable just adopting a budget that I know is going to be 30% smaller without us having any say about which 30% that is. So that's why, Mr. Elhannes, I think we do want just a priority list.
That was.
And that's really the point of the conversation when we presented the budget last time, that the budget preparation starts in December. So to change the whole thing based on our fear of where it could end up, we could be laying people off right now if that's what we decided to do, and that would be a pretty draconic step that we don't want to take. So I do believe that the best step is to pass the budget that we have here, and then immediately get back into figuring out where we can hold off on spending while we wait to see what the revenue actually is going to look like. I do think there is a chance that the city would get some level of relief from the federal government, because cities all over the country are going to be having very significant problems. So that, we don't want to take these draconic steps and then have somewhat of the hole plugged by the federal government after we took draconic steps. If we have this spending guideline, essentially the budget, we can spend up to a certain amount, and we just delay on some of these capital projects, we are still complying with the budget. We'll just wait till later in the year. If things look good, we move forward with those projects. If things don't look good, then we come back and say we want to push these projects to later. So it's a pretty straightforward from our process. So,
Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, and all I was gonna say was, I mean, really my point was not necessarily, I don't expect anybody to be psychic and know what the true impact of this is gonna be. But if we do have an idea that there are some projects that we can put off, I just want to be in the know of those priorities. So that way, maybe it's managing expectations. Maybe it's just like more knowledge for each individual council member. But I know that this is not a similar situation, but it's somewhat parallel, that we did do this before and priorities. And I think we do have an understanding of what's absolutely necessary and what's not in terms of capital improvement, like with a grant or not, this is money that's going to be spent that we might not have. So yeah, a list of priorities would be great. Thank you.
Any other comments on this one? All right, so what's next?
Tim, parks? Capital improvement parks?
The CIP parks.
Did we lose Tim?
No, we're.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, you went off the bottom of my screen.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the Capital Improvement Fund budget request for fiscal year 2021. Again, this is a pre-COVID conversation, so I wasn't sure exactly where we were going to go with that conversation, but this is helpful today, of course. So typically the funds for the Parks Capital come from grant money such as Natural Resources Trust Fund, Council of the Arts and Cultural Ingham County Trails and Parks millage. Funds will come from fundraising campaigns that various organizations within the community participate in over the years. Years ago, the soccer clubs were very active in doing fundraising for the soccer park. Right now, we've got the East Lansing Baseball Club doing some fundraising for softball complex improvements. And then from year to year, if city council sees a priority, they will approve transfers from other funds to the general to the CIP from the general fund. I will say, you can go to the next slide, Nicole. Thank you. These are the projects that we've identified for this year. I will say for fiscal year 2021, there's no funds being requested out of the city's general fund for any of these projects. There is some income tax funds that we're proposing. For example, the very first project, the replace the liner for the aquatic center and the pools and falls feature. That's $175,000. That request indeed, again, pre-COVID, was all income tax funds that we were planning to use for that particular project. The second project, the White Park Trail Extension and Natural Area Enhancements, if you've been by that park at all, that work has already started. And we expect that to finish that project, the fiscal year, to $265,800 will get us to a $769,000 project. Now, this project is 100% funds coming from other sources. $469,000 grant from the Ingham County Trails and Parks millage, and also $300,000 coming from a Natural Resources Trust Fund grant. So that's 100% grant money. The Patriarchs Park Pavilion and restroom renovation, we received a $300,000 Natural Resources Trust Fund grant, and this is a $500,000 anticipated project at this point in time. And the match, if you will, of $280,000, $300,000, or excuse me, about $200,000 is we're proposing income tax funds for that particular project in fiscal year 21. Now, the softball complex improvements request of $25,000 for that. We've got, right now, we've got $59,000 in the fund that we've received from the East Lansing Baseball Club, and the additional $25,000 is anticipated to come from additional fundraising that the club does. Now, even that type of work could be a little bit different as we look towards the future, whether they'll be able to do that or not as we look towards the future. And then the Northern Tier Trail Improvements, Relocate Trail. Last night, Wendy Longpre represented the city of East Lansing at the Ingham County Parks Commission meeting, and that $150,000 to relocate a section of the trail on the Northern Tier Trail. The Parks Commission in Ingham County will be recommending to the Board of Commissioners that they do provide the funding for this particular project. So it was approved at the Park Commission level, but it has to be approved by the Parks Commission. So all the funding for that will come from the Ingham County Trails and Parks millage. I do want to say, not in this list, but another recommendation that we made last night to the Ingham County Parks Commission was they awarded us $469,000 to put pedestrian bridges at Riveria Drive to service the Tamarack neighborhood for connecting to the Northern Tier Trail. And it also included funds for pedestrian bridge at Colorado Drive serving the Bessemer neighborhood. Our match for that, we requested $300,000 from Natural Resources Trust Fund. Those funds were not provided to us. We went back to the county and asked for the additional $300,000 to fully fund that project. And again, the County Parks Commission will be making a recommendation to the full Board of Commissioners from the county to fully fund the pedestrian bridges project. Again, that's not on the slide, but that's a project that they are looking at. So again, no general fund in this, a little bit of income tax funds, but for the most part, this is funds coming from other revenue sources planned at this point. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Stevens.
I suppose just because I'm curious, could we have the just specifically because it's income tax funds, if we're doing a list of priority on capital improvement projects, could we have the one item that was on the parks improvement projects also included in that list of priorities? Just in case we are talking about pension issues and other allocations for something that we might need for infrastructure improvements.
George, you're muted. I think that what Councilmember Stevens is asking is we want a list of priorities in the capital budget. And since there is an income tax item in the Parks and Rec, that would have to be something that we'd see too on that
Yes.
list.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mayor.
Yep.
There's actually
So
two
basically-
income tax. There's actually two projects that we're proposing.
Oh yeah, the partially funded. That one as well. Then yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions for Tim? All right. And is that the last item, Mr. Lohanis? Oh, sorry.
No, we have the Parks and Rec Fund.
Oh, right.
Tim?
Parks and Recreation Operating Fund. So as the conversation continues to go, this budget was prepared prior, pre-COVID, 2019. So other than preliminary revised fiscal year 2020 year-end estimate, the budget requests we're presenting tonight will certainly need to be amended if that's the way City Council chooses to move forward with that. And any ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 outbreak, as those come up, we'll learn more about those as we move through the operations and how they're affecting our operations and our budget as we look towards fiscal year 21. With regard to some immediate plans associated with Parks and Recreation operations due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we have compiled some plans to offer a menu of activities, events, things such as the Art Festival out of Virtual Art Festival, the virtual Jazz Festival. Kathleen Miller has looked at some fitness programs that we're offering on a virtual basis and things of that nature. So to get us through the summer, as far as offering some level of activities, events that our community is accustomed to having, those are some of the things that we're looking at right now. We've also created what we think to be a responsible phased startup plan for much of our suspended, canceled, closed activities, events and facilities, which have been, that information's been forwarded to the media. I think it's also been shared with City Council. So we're continuing to look at adjusting our offerings as we look towards the impacts associated with the COVID-19. We're not sure exactly how they're going to affect our budget, but I'll get to a slide here in a minute that talks about fiscal year end 2020, which we've anticipated some impacts. Our sources of revenue, 4.5 million is what we were looking at the time, with 2.1 million coming from the city's general fund, and then 2.4 million at the time as we prepared the budget from what we call other sources of income or revenue. And more detail regarding those other sources is on the next slide here. And grants coming from intergovernmental revenue, $12,000. That's typically, I think we've got an Ingham County Hotel Motel grant that we're anticipating for the Jazz Festival, next year's Jazz Festival, not this year's Jazz Festival, and another cultural arts grant. So that comes up with the $12,000 that we're looking at. The charges for services historically come from program fees, and those are the fees that we charge our patrons for any of the activities, classes, services, athletic leagues, what have you, that they get involved with. So $1.2 million is what we're expecting from that. Daily admissions, which was identified as like Aquatic Center daily admissions, as well as Hannah Community Center annual passes for the community center, concession sales, mainly at the Aquatic Center, personal training, sales from the art gallery that we have there, and when we have exhibits, the artists sell some of their pieces, some food service and merchandise sales. With respect to rental income, that's actually rental reservation space and at the community center, and also field rentals at the soccer complex and the softball complex. And then community support, the sponsorships is largely Jazz Festival funds in the amount of $75,000, which we have projected for next fiscal year. Fundraising is $24,000 of that comes from the Children's Theater 501c3. They make an annual contribution. And the rest is football parking, if there is football in the fall next year. So those are the types of things that we get from those income sources. And then other financing obviously is the general fund. And I think there's a little bit of interest in there. So those are the things that we look at with respect to, if you go back one, Nicole, the next one. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Again, on the expense side, $4.5 million in expenses. Personnel services, $2.2 million. This represents about a 3.3% increase. If we, again, figured at pre-COVID-19 outbreak times, we have 15 full-time staff folks historically, and we have one regular part-time. We have in the head count document that's provided in the finance budget put together by the finance department, we have 64,656 hours of contingent part-time, which comes out to about, I think, 34 full-time equivalents. Of those, probably 90 to 100 of those folks are seasonal, people that would typically work at the Aquatic Center, or they would typically work at like the summer camp program or B&A and programs of that nature. And then with respect to operating costs, 2.3 million in operating costs, which is the budget that was prepared was about almost even with the previous year in terms of operating costs. And this, of course, is all the costs associated with offering our activities, programs, events, classes, athletic leagues, and of course, the community center, the family aquatic center, and our outdoor athletic complexes. The expenses beyond program expenses include repairs and maintenance, utilities, insurance, telephone, internal service charges for computers, the building rentals that we charge to ourselves, if you will, out of the fees that we collect. DPW charges for maintenance and garage fees, contract class instructors and what have you. So that is sort of the expense side of the budget. And then the next slide shows a sort of comparison by our 15 program areas that we've identified over the years in the budget, where we have revenues on one side and expenses on the other side. So you get kind of a look at the revenue side of the various 15 programs and the expense side of the various 15 programs that we offer. So you get it, and we try to recover as much cost as we possibly can out of the Parks and Recreation Fund through the fees and charges that we have available. And next is the statement of fund balance. Our fund balance was estimated pre-COVID again to go from 100,922 to about 114,000 between now and 2021. So we were operating at, right at not increasing our fund balance, but maintaining our fund balance is what we were looking at. What we have found out, if we go to the next slide, is that our fund balance at 2019 was $100,000. We were going to have minimal changes to the fund balance as a result of COVID-19, and a full analysis to determine the additional funding is needed with the closure of the facilities and programs, as we're doing right now. Our initial estimate for this short period of time in the last quarter of fiscal year 2020 is that we would have a $300,000 operating shortfall. So we would need to transfer funds from the general fund to the Parks and Recreation Fund at the end of this fiscal year. That's based on all of the cancellations, all of the postponements, all of the closings, and everything else that we're looking at this point in time is just in the last quarter of the year, a $300,000 shortfall. So that's the end of that. Last year we did some benchmarking. I was not planning to go over that tonight unless City Council wanted me to go over benchmarking. I don't know how relevant benchmarking is at this point in time against other communities when we are looking at the challenges that we're facing over the course of the next 12, 18, maybe even 24 months. So with any questions with respect to the Parks and Recreation Fund, I'm more than happy to try to answer them.
Councilmember Gregg.
I just wanted to, that $300,000 shortfall, is that just for the 2 months that we've been closed?
Yeah, that's, you start to add up all of April, all of May, and June. So it's going to be for the 3 months is what we're projecting.
Okay.
Mr. McCaffrey, is that, do we have to refund anything? Did we have to refund, for example, the fitness club memberships and things like that?
So we had, for example, the biggest refunds that we did were in the before and after school program. I'm not remembering exactly, but I think we're going to end up refunding around $25,000 or $30,000 because parents pay like in advance for that. So that we had to refund like about $25,000 or $30,000. That was already factored into this amount that this $300,000 amount. But yes, if folks did not receive a service that they paid for, they were either refunded or credited.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Stevens.
Thanks, Tim. So I guess this goes into a number of different programs, but are there programs in which people registered during, are you seeing any decline in registrations under the budget pre-COVID that you gave us? You have 3,500 about registrants in 2019. Are you seeing a drop off in that right now for programs that they might be registering for the summer or for?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because we've not really accepted any program registration for any of June or even into July. We've set and hopefully we could open up in the middle of July is kind of like what we're looking at right now. So we're not taking any registrations for programs until probably the first part of June. And about the only youth program that we're planning to offer, given the situation this summer, is going to be the licensed summer camp program. Begin that about the middle of July. And we still have some anxiety about whether that's going to actually be able to go or not. We sure hope it will be. We want to make sure that we can offer a safe environment for the children. And Julianne Jennings is working very closely with health officials, LARA, the State Licensing Association, and what have you, so that if we do get to offer it, we have extensive training for the staff before we do offer the program.
So are there any other program, maybe this is a question that you can answer in the form of writing later on, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any other programs that rely on registration during this time specifically, or programs that might start during this time that you estimate we're going to see probably a significant decline in, or at least a delay in funds
Yeah.
getting to us?
Yes, there's programs that we're flat canceling for the summer. Our athletic leagues, our youth athletic leagues are canceled. Our adult softball league is canceled. Our rental reservations for the softball complex, the soccer complex, we're anticipating optimistically in August 3rd opening of that, and we charge clubs rental reservation fees. All of those revenues are, we're not going to see the revenues associated with that.
Okay, I just, so the reason why I'm asking a lot of these questions is, and you know this infinitely better than I do. So just because some of these revenues rely on registrations, on rental income and other things that is planned out just a little bit in advance. I'm wondering if there's if this budget specifically would have any more information just based on estimations that we're getting right now, people not registering for, obviously nobody's renting out a room in the Hannah Center right now, people not registering for programs on what we're really looking at in terms of deflated revenues.
Right. So we've estimated this $300,000 shortfall between the 1st of April and the end of this fiscal year as a result of none of those revenues coming in.
Okay, is there any breakout you could give us on that 300,000 that might give me a little bit more insight into the mechanics behind it?
Sure. I'm not sure exactly what you want, but we can certainly.
Yeah, we don't need it right now.
No, we don't. I'm not asking for it. No, by no means am I asking for it right now. But
Councilmember Meadows. There you go.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. I'm not quite clear on what the Mayor Pro Tem is asking for either, but I think further down the road, when these programs open up again, we'll be able to evaluate the reduction in participants, because there are going to be a certain number of people who, even when we open things up, are going to say, I'm not going to go stand with 20 other people in some location. I'm not going to participate in these programs until I'm sure that I have, some kind of vaccine, or I'm sure that, the danger is past. So I think we can expect that there will be a reduction in revenue because of fewer participants. I think right now we just don't offer any programs. So of course we don't have the participants who are signing up for that. But I think it's going to be the end of the summer or end of the fall before we get the kind of evidence that I think the Mayor Pro Tem is really looking for.
And what I was looking for in this budget, Mr. McCaffrey, I was wondering if the savings that we were going to have from not opening the pool and not hiring the part-time people there and in other places would offset the loss of revenue. And what you're saying is that the loss of revenue was higher than the reduction in expenditure. So we actually had a net loss in revenue. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was afraid of.
I mean, one of the steps we took immediately, and council knows, well, not immediately, several weeks in, was to lay off a number of the contingent employees. We would be in a much worse situation because citywide, we said we were spending an additional $30,000, I believe, every payroll. So that was one of the things we had to take to stop the
bleeding,
flowing of the money out. Yes, exactly. So I think that was a good step, a tough step, but the right step. And I think at this point, we just have to wait to see when the programs can start up again, and then try to control the cost to the greatest extent possible until we get to that point.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. McCaffrey? Councilmember Gregg.
Are there cosmetic things that we can do? I assume, well, I don't guess I shouldn't assume. I would hope that we're not going to be like mowing and doing the things that we would do at the soccer complex when it's not being used. Are there things like
We-
that that we can kind of,
With the anticipation of starting up in August, we're certainly going, we're continuing mowing the soccer complex and the softball complex, again, with the anticipation of opening it up. Otherwise, you're going to end up causing perhaps additional, more expensive maintenance problems if you don't stay up on your maintenance at those outdoor complexes.
Yeah, because it's not just a grass field, it's turf, so it's got to be kept in good shape with the turf maintenance program so that it stays in good shape for use in the future.
Councilmember Stevens?
For the soccer complex, that revenue is based on a lot of tournaments, correct? Am I remembering that right from last year?
We have
Training.
We have no tournaments out at the soccer complex.
Oh.
We have all club play. It's all training, revenue from training. For example, Capital City Athletic, they didn't have their spring season. Capital City Athletic would normally pay us about $20,000 to $25,000 in rental reservation fee for spring. So that's one example. And East Lansing Soccer Club, they would normally have paid us I don't know, between $5,000 and $7,000 perhaps this spring. So all of that revenue is gone. So it's all clubs using the facility, the games and training.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no further questions, does that conclude the report?
It concludes the presentation unless council has more questions for anybody else. Then that's, to McCaffrey, were you done, Mr. McCaffrey?
I'm done.
Okay, so unless there's questions about any budget items the council wants to address, we'd be happy to try to answer those as well, because like I said, we have the people available. So, but we'll also, of course, take your questions in writing.
Any questions, or would everybody like to submit their questions in writing? Councilmember Gregg.
well, not a question, just a comment. Since this is my first time going through this, and since it's so, unusual with the circumstances, I don't know. I just wanted to say it's frustrating. I'm not placing blame with that. I'm just expressing frustration in general. I don't even know where to pick at it, basically, because it's like, yeah, anyway.
That's interesting you said that. I was just thinking the same thing, that I've never been so frustrated.
Yeah.
And the reason for me is that it's been 7 years of, oh, we got to cut this, we have to cut this, we have to cut this. And then finally we can start putting back, and then all of a sudden the world blows up. Second of all, we can't sit around and talk about this in a meeting like we would, because this works, but it doesn't work as well. You can't really get into it. It doesn't seem like. And then the third thing is just that you have no idea what's going to happen in the future either. It's
Right.
not like,
I think that's the part that's really hard for me, is that I think the ongoing fallout from this, plus it's not like it's done. It's not like we are through it. We're still very much in the middle of it. The economic fallout, the social fallout, everything is still escalating, accumulating. Yeah, anyway. I appreciate all of the work that everybody's put in to kind of scramble and get this into some sort of presentable condition, consider the circumstances, but it's just, frustration is not a strong enough word. Devastation is probably too strong of a word, although maybe not. It's,
we might get there. We might get to devastation. Hopefully not.
Yeah. So thanks everybody. Sorry.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you're saying, and to go through definitely a budget period the first time through in this kind of situation is that'd definitely be trying for me. I had a pretty dang hard time doing it myself while we had a bunch more meetings in person. Yeah, I want to say that I probably ask a few questions of staff that they don't know the answers to. And I want to say that I don't expect people to know the answers to. I usually, and I think Councilmember Meadows will probably agree with me on this. I'm asking to ask to see if there are estimations, if there are any more information that we know. Reading this giant document doesn't give us a lot of indication into what the reality is going to be. So I do appreciate the responsiveness of staff, especially on those questions, and any questions in the future that I might ask and might not be able to be answered. So thank you, guys.
Okay, anything else? Well, if there's nothing else, I will declare that we are adjourned.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
2.5 hours seems to be our standard meeting format.
Yeah, I don't think I like that, but.